Generation 1 of Pokemon features so many bugs, glitches, secrets, and Easter eggs, from the Stand By Me reference at the very beginning of the game to the famous Mew truck. But one I've only learned about recently is this secret PC in Celadon City. If you head down to the bottom right-hand corner of Celadon City and head on into the building, you'll see a counter that reminds you a lot of the counters in the Pokemon Center. My assumption is this is to do with the tile set, and if you head to the end of the counter, you can access an invisible PC, just like the ones that you'd find in the Pokemon Center. In Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal, you can use Fly to access a bunch of towns across Johto, but one of the areas you can access via Fly is actually not a town, it's the Lake of Rage. The fact that you can fly here may be a reference to the fact that Lake of Rage was actually once originally supposed to be the home of the 7th Pokemon Gym, as seen in the Gold and Silver Space World demo. Fittingly, across both the anime and the games, Gyarados has Pokedex entries talking about how it once destroyed an entire village, so potentially the location that was once here at the Lake of Rage. In Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, there's actually an Easter egg that I thought I was making up until others online confirmed that they also saw this. As you ascend Mount Chimney in the cable car, there is a 1 in 64 chance that a hiker or picnicker or camper will appear hiking up the trail. I knew I didn't make this up. It's a rare sight, but I'm glad I didn't make it up. Pokemon Fire Red, Leaf Green are next, and they directly reference the Mew truck that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. If you trade your copy of Pokemon with Cut so that you don't have to do the SS Anne quest, then the SS Anne will stay docked in Vermilion City. From there, you continue the game until you have Surf, where you can surf across the harbor and then access this truck. This is the very truck that Playground Rumors back in the day suggested was the place where you could find Mew if you use Strength on it. While Mew isn't here in Fire Red and Leaf Green, at the end of the dock is an invisible lava cookie, as a little reference. Generation 4's Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum also feature a throwback to Red, Blue, and Yellow. When entering the tunnel that connects Canalive City to Route 218, there is a guard who mentions how thirsty they are, and this of course is a direct reference to Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow, where thirsty guards stop you from entering Saffron City. All you have to do is get them a cup of tea, and they will share it between all 4 of themselves. I'm gonna save the best till last, so skipping over Heart Gold and Soul Silver for a moment, we move on to Generation 5's Pokemon Black and White. In Icarus City, you can find an ex-Team Rocket grunt who has a very peculiar way of speaking. This is a reference to a Team Rocket grunt that we actually would have met earlier in the series in Pokemon Gold and Silver, who stole the mechanical parts for the power plant in Cerulean City. Here he's moved on and settled down, and even has a family, which is really nice. Interestingly, this guard is one of the few points of reference we can actually have for the Pokemon timeline as well. Speaking of the Pokemon timeline, a few years later comes Pokemon Black and White 2, and in those games we actually get to look at the item the Relic Crown for the first time in the Abyssal Ruins. This looks a lot like the one that they used at N's coronation in Pokemon Black and White, suggesting that this Relic Crown and the one used by N really was a crown of the ancient days of the Unova region. But additionally, it would also come to resemble the head of Zacian from Pokemon Sword and Shield. Given that the Unova region is based off of parts of the US and the Galar region parts of the UK, and given the parallels to human history, it seems likely that this Relic Crown was actually a setup for the Galar region coming just a few generations later. Pokemon did something actually very similar in Pokemon X and Y, where we obtained the item the Strange Souvenir. It comes from a hiker in one of the hotels who claims that they came from another region, not Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, or Unova. What other region could that be? The Strange Souvenir was then, of course, obtainable in Pokemon Sun and Moon. Interestingly enough, though, that hiker also mentions that you should see the champion from where they're from, which is just interesting because in Sun and Moon there was no champion. The Pokemon League is being newly formed. Before we get on to Sun and Moon, though, we have Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, which is littered with Easter eggs and references. Actually, one of the first games that made me look into these kinds of topics. My favorite of which, though, is that in certain houses you can see a map on the top right corner wall of the house, and this map is none other than the Poke-Earth featured on Cerebi.net. My friend Joe was very, very proud of that one. As a side note, I've also worked on a map of the Pokemon world here on the channel, and I actually asked Joe Merrick, who runs Cerebi.net, to update the Poke-Earth to feature it, to which he said, "No, mine's in the game now." Fair enough. Can't argue with that. In Pokemon Sun and Moon, there is a direct reference to Giovanni, seemingly alluding to the upcoming Rainbow Rocket episode. In the Mali City Garden, which references architecture found across the Kanto and Johto region, there is a bridge, a peculiar bridge that might remind you of the Nugget Bridge from Generation 1. And actually, it is a gauntlet of trainers who you fight your way across until eventually you battle someone who uses an Ekans. This person asks you if you want to join Team Rocket. This is a direct reference to that bridge and the Rocket Grunt who stands at the end wanting to recruit you. At the end, though, he says he's joking, and he wonders what old Giovanni is up to nowadays, paving the way for Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, though, my favorite reference is certainly the one to do with the GS Ball. The GS Ball first appeared in the Pokemon animated series and in Japan only in the game Pokemon Crystal. It was intended to be a special event item which would give you access to the Pokemon Celebi, and in the anime was supposed to contain Celebi, a plotline that was scrapped when the Pokemon movie Forever came out. However, in this game, we get the first reference to it in nearly 20 years, as it's referenced as being the greatest Smith's Ball, as in the ball that only the greatest Smiths can create or access or open. This would explain why Ash had to take it to Kurt, a character who is probably one of the greatest Smiths of Pokeballs in the Pokemon world's history. Speaking of Pokemon Forever, the movie, there's actually a direct reference to that movie in the games Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. If you step inside Professor Oak's lab, on the very top of his bookshelf, you can see what appears to be a little notebook. This is a notebook or sketchbook that appears in Pokemon Forever. The young Professor Oak doodles a picture of Celebi and Pikachu in here. Then we enter the current generation with Pokemon Sword and Shield. The home of the 7th Pokemon Gym in Galar is Spikemuth, and as you walk along this dark alleyway, there are neon signs and posters and torn bits of paper all over the place, and one of them has an odd reference to the Beauty Trainer class from Generation 2. Why in the world this is being referenced of all things, I have no idea, but it's a fun one, and it's a very much a blink and you'll miss it kind of Easter egg. In Birlliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, despite them being faithful remakes, there actually is a change from Generation 4's Diamond and Pearl. In Sunnyshore's City in the original games, there's a giant stone statue of a Munchlax off the coast of the town, but in Birlliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, it's evolved into a fully evolved Snorlax. Pokemon Legends Arceus features all kinds of Easter egg secrets and references. In fact, I've done a video with over 125 of them, but absolutely my favorite of all are the character relationships. Many of the characters appearing in the game are ancestors to modern day characters, some to just one, but others to multiple, and one of them clearly ties together a theory I've had for a while. Charm of the Misfortunes is hard to place. Is she an ancestor to Agatha or Bertha? Clearly she's intended to be both, using two Pokemon, a Rhydon and a Gengar, representing each of those trainers. Those trainers have been linked together before, briefly in passing mentioned by Chantal of the Unova Elite Four as having a similar vibe about them. Now we have the current Pokemon games, Scarlet and Violet, which I believe in their names are a reference to Red and Blue. In the trailer revealing Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, we see a lot of symbolism of time travel, and a lot of people have speculated that that means that time travel will feature a big part in the game. But this may also be a reference to a new beginning for Pokemon. The idea that it's sort of going back in time to the start, which again can be seen in those names, Scarlet and Violet, which are just different shades of red and blue. Now, I did say I'd save the best till last. Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Gold and Soul Silver, my favorite Easter egg in the whole franchise. On Route 38, west of Ecruteak City, there is a trainer, a bird keeper, who goes by the name Bird Keeper Toby. This is clearly a direct reference to me. Despite the fact that my YouTube channel didn't exist when Pokemon Gold Silver and the remakes Heart Gold and Soul Silver came out, I believe that Game Freak knew what I was planning all along. Were there any secrets, Easter eggs, and references in this video that you didn't know? If so, let me know. Hey Pokemon Masters, Bird Keeper Toby here, and last week I stole a video idea by Zeltic, my favorite Easter egg from each of the main series Pokemon games. Now, as a sort of reoccurring gag, I'm doing it again, and this time I'm stealing his idea for reoccurring Easter eggs throughout the series. Please, if you like Zelda, go check out Zeltic. He is absolutely fantastic. He's my favorite Zelda channel, hands down. And don't worry, I'm not totally stealing. I did talk to him about it, but I thought it would be fun to do the same thing for the Pokemon franchise. Look back throughout the main series of games, and maybe even the anime as well, and see if there are some reoccurring gags and Easter eggs and references that keep on popping up. These are fun because it's unlikely I've covered them in any of my series to do with Easter eggs, because standalone they don't mean a whole lot. It's only when you look at the franchise as a whole that you start to see the Easter egg and the reference replaying itself. So let's start. One of my favorite Easter eggs in the Pokemon world is youngster Joey and his top percentage Rattata. It just started as a joke. Leaving Pewter City, you'd encounter a trainer with a Rattata who was pretty enthusiastic about said Rattata, youngster Joey. My Rattata's in the top percentage of all Rattata. And then, sure enough, in Generation 2, he reappeared, battling with his Rattata and blocking your route after Cherry Grove City. Was this the same youngster Joey? Was it a different youngster Joey? We don't know, because different youngster Joeys appear all throughout the Pokemon world. In Hoenn, there's a youngster Joey with a Zigzagoon. In Unova, a youngster Joey with a Patrat. And in X and Y, one with a Scatterbug and Fletchinder. In Sun and Moon, there's another at the trainer school. In Gold and Silver and Heart Gold and Soul Silver, However, he'll actually evolve his Rattata into a Raticate, but on the Pokegear will still brag about his Rattata, even after it's evolved. Looks like he got the message though, because in Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, he's actually changed from a youngster and grown up into a bird keeper. Bird keeper Joey. Good job, Joey. I think the other most famous early route NPC in Pokemon is the person who likes shorts. I like shorts. They're comfy and easy to wear. Lots of the NPCs have pretty mundane dialogue, talking about how they like Pokemon that they think are strong or cute or tough, or how you can't possibly beat them. But this youngster saying, I like shorts, and then commenting on how they're comfy and easy to wear became a little bit of a sensation in the Pokemon world, reappearing in Pokemon Black and White 2. There's a lady who makes the same kind of comment about a dress. Pokemon Masters, Pokemon X and Y. This trainer appears all over the Pokemon world. Just different people commenting on how comfortable the clothes they're wearing are. It's a wholesome one, juxtaposed to the many dead people that show up across the Pokemon world. It was around Pokemon X and Y when people first entered the elevator in Lumio City, came out and saw an NPC do this. Hovering around the room with no explanation, the lights come off and then on, and there she is. No, you're not the one. She disappeared, and Poketubers like myself became very interested in this ghost girl in Lumio City. Was there an explanation to her? We don't know, but it turns out she's not the only ghost girl in Pokemon. As far back as Pokemon Diamond and Pearl in the old chateau, a little girl's ghost can be seen wandering around the halls. In Black and White and Black and White 2, there's actually a whole subplot about a young girl who gets lost with her Abra inside the nightmare of a Darkrai. Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire has the best hidden Easter egg of a ghost girl in Pokemon. In the Elite Four member Phoebe's room, you can see just for a fraction of a second, just for a frame, a young girl holding a Pokédoll. Perhaps it's supposed to be a little hint towards Mimikyu coming in the next generation, who is stalking a Stroller after the trial. In Pokemon Sword and Shield in Hammerlock City, there's an old note that you can receive from a little girl, and when you take it where she wants you to take it, the person who receives the note is very surprised, saying the person who wrote this died a long time ago, having fallen ill, and then in their house there's a young person who's just talking to a wall. Lots of creepiness in the world of Pokemon. Even in Pokemon Legends Arceus, obtaining Spiritomb comes from a quest given by a young girl possessed by a ghost. Her name is Vessa, and Vessa, of course, is short for vessel. I wonder what it is about women who can master the ghostly arts in the world of Pokemon. Even when it comes to Elite Four members, gym leaders, and trial captains, they outnumber the men. Agatha, Phoebe, Fantina, Chantal, and Ace Roller are all ghost experts. An Easter egg that's a little bit more wholesome is actually seeable within the very first few seconds of any Pokemon game. As you're leaving your bedroom, you might catch a glimpse of the latest Nintendo home console sat in your room. An SNES, a Nintendo GameCube, a Nintendo Wii or Wii U, a Nintendo Switch. In fact, when it comes to the Nintendo Switch, the Joy-Cons are actually interchangeable. Depending on what Joy-Cons that you have on your Switch at the time, that is the appearance that the in-game Switch will take. Of course, the only game where there isn't a console in your bedroom is Pokemon Legends Arceus, and that makes sense because it's set in the past. However, inside the game, there's unused data of a single room, a player's bedroom in which, yep, you guessed it, the Nintendo Switch can be seen. The next recurring Easter egg that I really like is the Game Freak staff. They insert themselves into the games with headquarters in Celadon City, Celestica City, as well as Here Beach, and then they are vacationing, usually in Lily Cove, at the Hotel Grand Lake in Sinnoh, and in Curmarine in Circhester. In these locations across the Pokemon world, you'll find Game Freak staff. In more recent years, they tend to want to battle you, and battling them will reward you with certain prizes like the Shiny Charm or the Oval Charm, and sometimes they just want to congratulate you on completing your Pokedex with various documents notifying your incredible achievement. For this next one, let's talk about more of a trope than a reoccurring Easter egg. In Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow, there is a power plant that contains the legendary Pokemon Zapdos. Going forward throughout the franchise, power plants have continued to appear, and they've thought to be the home of legendary Pokemon, but most of them have been repeatedly inaccessible. This all started with Pokemon X and Y, where there's the Kalos power plant, and certain areas of the power plant are locked off. People thought the key may become available in an event distribution, but unfortunately it wasn't. These rooms are still inaccessible. It was thought that perhaps they'd become the home of Volcanion, but Volcanion was distributed regularly. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, it was unsurprising when the new Marvel power plant was only one floor, because that's exactly the way it was in Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. However, they added in this detail, a staircase that you can't go down, leaving people to wonder what is inside these power plants. This only further continued in Sun and Moon and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. On Ula Ula Island, if you go to Blush Mountain, you'll find your way to the geothermal power plant, and you once again can't actually access the power plant. Instead, you can view it via a gate, but it's all fenced off. There's no going out there. And then finally, even as recently as Pokemon Sword and Shield, there's a power plant in the distance on Route 3 just left of Motorstoke. There you can see Chairman Rose is building up his empire, but this power plant, it's completely inaccessible because of a tiny little bit of rope that stops you going out there. What is the deal with all of these power plants that we can't access? Is this just a recurring gag that Pokemon are dropping for us? Or is this building up to one day we'll revisit a power plant and find a legendary Pokemon? The power of science is amazing. I couldn't leave this one out after I saw it in the latest Scarlet and Violet trailer. It's not just a random line of dialogue that this NPC is dropping, but this line of dialogue actually goes back right to the very beginning of Pokemon, where in Pallet Town you will get told that the power of science is amazing. This phrase comes up all the time throughout Pokemon history, and actually even made its way into the animated series. Throughout the entire XY and XYZ arcs of the anime, whenever Clemont would use a particularly interesting gadget, Ash Ketchum would say, "Science is amazing," in reference to this.
Science is so amazing!
This final recurring Easter egg is actually one of my favorites, but isn't to do with the Pokemon games. You'll have to excuse me, this is a movie one. Since 2005's Pokemon Lucario and the Mystery of Mew movie, there have been a recurring set of characters that have appeared in all of the Pokemon movies. Well, more or less all of them. A mother and daughter known simply as just mother and daughter. At first, they weren't a recurring gag, not appearing in the movie following Lucario and the Mystery of Mew, but then in the... Wait, what movie follows Lucario and the Mystery of... Oh yeah. But then they appeared in every main Pokemon animated movie since the rise of Darkrai. They've also appeared in a Mega Evolution short for Latios and Latias, a special short called A Ripple in Time most recently, and even in the CGI animated Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolutions, where they're seen in the end credits. These are just some of my favorite reoccurring Easter eggs from across Pokemon, and if there's any big ones that I've missed, let me know in the comments. And of course, if you want to check out more reoccurring Easter eggs, you can check out the ones about The Legend of Zelda by Zeltic. And if you'd like to see my favorite Easter eggs from each Pokemon game, you can also check out that link at the top of the description. Thank you all for watching, and of course, so hi Pokemon Masters. And here are my 50 Easter eggs on Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Jumping straight out the gate with number one, literally in the intro cutscene, we get to have a glimpse at the classrooms of the Paldea region in Mesagoza City. And there we see the history teacher, Miss Rhyfort, who's my new favorite character because she gives you so much Pokemon lore, and she is decorated in legendary Pokemon. She's got a Marshadow hair clip, a Articuno necklace, a Lunala belt, and I think there's a Zygarde or a Tapu on her wrist. You also shortly after see one of the other classrooms where we see a teacher, and behind him is the Altar of the Sun and an Alolan Raichu pin on his chest. Clearly, he's teaching foreign languages about the Alola region, but it's amazing because when you speak to him, I don't think he ever says Alola. Once you start the game, you're in your house, you can find a substitute doll sitting on the shelf. I wonder what it's a substitute for. And we get some pretty big nods that you are from the Galar region. Not only does your mum offer the principal Clavel, offer him tea, but also you have a pet Squovet. You can try and do the spin of Leon, but you'll mess it up. And there are stickers in your bedroom that are of Galar Pokemon. Just outside the house, you'll find the Power of Science is Amazing guy, who appears in most Pokemon games, but first of all in Pallet Town. Number 5, if you head on down the road into Nemona's house, you're going to find some beautiful abstract artwork, but if you look closely, you can actually see a Greninja in there somewhere. Look, you can see its little feet, you can see its tongue. It's a really cool abstract of Greninja. Shortly after, you're going to meet the character of Arven, and Arven is a lot nicer later on in the story, but instead starts the journey as a little bit of a jerk. As one of your main rivals and being a bit of a jerk, it's no surprise that he's related to the professors of the game, Sada and Churro. This may be a nod to Gary Oak, your first rival in Pokemon Red and Blue, who is a jerk to you, and of course is the grandson of Professor Oak. Next up, you'll head for Mesagoza City, and you'll meet one of the other teachers, Jack. Now, I believe Jack to be the descendant of Adamant. In Pokemon Legends Arceus, we met the ancestor characters of a number of existing characters, but both Adamant and Iridia seem to have no discernible connection. Some people made some guesses about Iridia being May or Serena. I don't really agree with that. But Adamant was the hardest to place, but now we can see Adamant's hair relatively clearly here on Jack. On top of that, Jack has very polyagonal glasses, which kind of matches up with the outfit of Adamant. One of the quests you'll be setting off in this game is the Victory Road quest to, of course, defeat all the gym leaders. Victory Road is a reference to multiple locations throughout the Pokemon world set before the Elite Four, the final challenge for the ultimate trainers. Professor Sado and Chura are both references themselves to the past and future, hinting at their roles within the game, with, of course, Sada and Churro both coming from the words in Spanish for past past and future. Posada and Futuro. Mexico's City has a giant plaza, and I don't know if this counts as an Easter egg. This game is very lacking in Easter eggs compared to something like Pokemon Legends Arceus. I'll give you a little bonus one at the end, don't worry. Mexico's City has a giant plaza that represents all of the different types of Pokemon. That's what's around the edges. Of course, representing the main mechanic of this game, Terastallization, which allows you to access all Pokemon types, which is why the Pokeball in the middle has a crystal with all of the different colors on it. In the overworld, pretty early on, you might find yourself face to face with a Gimmighoul. Gimmighoul's antennas resemble the item finder from Generation 1, which is now called the dowsing machine. And that's interesting because the whole point of Gimmighoul is to go and find items, to find all of the coins and bring them together. There's also something else going on Gimmighoul, which is our next Easter egg, which is its coin has the face of a Bronzor on it. And Bronzor has Pokedex entries talking about how it has a kind of mysteriousness to the pattern on its back. But what about its face? The Vivillon that you'll find in this region might not look super familiar to you, and that's because they were only available in events back when Pokemon X and Y came out. These Vivillons are special event Vivillons, and they are not native to any particular region of the world. So this is a cool way to introduce a Pokemon that's actually been unavailable for years. When battling the Bug-type gym leader in this town, though, you will find yourself face-to-face with a Terastallized Teddiursa. Now, while a lot of the different combinations and Terrestrial Pokemon are just cool typings, a Bug Teddiursa is specifically a reference to the phrase a bugbear, which, I'm gonna Google that right now. Hold up. Bugbear? A cause of obsessive fear, anxiety, or irritation. Huh. Kind of like Scarlet Violet's graphics. Similarly, Sudowoodo being a grass type is a great nod to Sudowoodo's whole premise, with it being a fake tree. Now it really is a Trudowoodo. The Ghost Terra type town is also a direct Easter egg to the ghosts that appear in Lavender Town's Pokemon Tower. This is how ghost Pokemon originally looked in Generation 1, and now it's getting referenced here. The flying type Terrestrial Crown was clearly designed with Pikachu in mind because it resembles the flying Pikachu that appears in the card game that actually won Pokemon Worlds this year, by the way. Terrestrial Pokemon in general are a huge reference to Crystal Pokemon that have appeared a number of times throughout the franchise, including not only in the card game, where Crystal Pokemon use the energy of other types to attack, but also the Crystal Onix, which is thought to be a different type from regular Onix. Unfortunately, Crystal Onix not truly made canon in these games. As you head down to the city with the Psychic type gym, you'll also notice some murals. These are probably the most in-your-face Easter eggs, and I absolutely adore them. These murals, made of a kind of mosaic pattern, are actually the sprite artwork of all overworld Pokemon in Generation 1. The gym leader Iona has some really cool Magnemite hair clips, and one of them is pink, and this got people talking at the beginning of the game before it came out, suggesting that there might be a new type of Magnemite. I guess that's technically true, but that's kind of a spoiler. Anyway, this is becoming a bit of a recurring trend because Clara in the Isle of Armor DLC also had a Dustox hair clip, which was a different color to regular Dustox, and people also thought we would get a new Dustox form. One of the Team Stars bases is known as Team Navi, and it's set in a forest. I can't help but feel like this is probably an Easter egg or reference to Navi the fairy of the Kokiri forest in The Legend of Zelda. The Let's Go feature, where you explore with your Pokemon by your side, is a direct reference to Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, where your Pokemon follow you around by your side, which of course is named after Pokemon Go, the game where you go walking with your Pokemon. One of the Pokemon that evolves into its final form in this way is Pawmi, and there's kind of two little things about Pawmi here. One, with Pawmi kind of being a reference to the unreleased Pokemon Gorochu, a 3-stage evolution line Pikachu, because Pikachu was originally supposed to have 2 evolutions, with the final one being Gorochu, and it was supposed to take on a more orangey color. But on top of all of that, shiny Pawmi doesn't look too dissimilar from this unreleased beta bear Pokemon. This was supposed to be one of the starters in Generation 2. Speaking of Generation 2 beta Pokemon, the Wooper evolution Clodsire clearly takes some level of inspiration from the beta Generation 2 Wooper evolution, which stays on all 4s. If you ride your Miraidon or Koraidon dead forward as fast as you can and then pull back on the stick, you'll do a mini slide, and this is clearly a reference to the Akira slide that appears throughout all sorts of anime and different media. In this generation, we got Wiglet and Wugtrio, and while this might not be a specific Easter egg, I just want to point out here that Pokemon have a weird Diglett obsession right now. Not only in Generation 6 did we get the Alolan Diglett and Dugtrio, but we've also seen Diglett hunting side quests in the Isle of Armor and the Grand Underground, and as well as that, we saw a giant Diglett statue in Sword and Shield. What's with this? Wooper has now become a poison type in the Paldea region, directly referencing the Pokedex entries in which Wooper talks about how it has to cover itself a poisonous film when it wants to come in on land, but it'll have to jump back in the water, and if it stays on water, it dries up, which is how it ends up becoming the ground type. Another interesting little Pokedex entry here is that Ampharos has a Pokedex entry that directly references the events of Generation 2, talking about how it makes for a great lighthouse Pokemon. Regidrago also has a Pokedex entry, not in this game, but in Sword and Shield, that talks about how it's made of crystallized dragon energy, and Terrestrial Pokemon are crystallized Pokemon energy types. And when you look to the Terrestrial crown for dragon Pokemon, you see that the head here is 99% the same as Regidrago's, the only difference being the nose isn't split. There's an odd artistic landmark in Artazon, which is actually a direct reference to a secret base object in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. This is one I probably would have missed if it wasn't for Twitter, so thank you for pointing this one out, Twitter. And the last shaman told me that I should go shopping more because the shop is run by a guy called Baggin, and Baggin is the guy who gives you more bag space in Pokemon Legends Arceus. The Corviknight taxi has now been replaced. While the method of travel is still the same, instead of using Corviknight, you have to use Squawkabilly because Corviknight, according to its Pokedex entry, gets hassled by Tinkaton, which is odd because they're both steel, but Tinkaton's fairy, so I don't really get how that works or why Squawkabilly would be any safer, but this is the exact same form of fast travel from Sword and Shield. Speaking of things being the same from Sword and Shield, in the shops in the background, you're going to see a bunch of Galar brand logos that you would have seen for the first time in the Sword and Shield games, on banners and in other shops. And in fact, in the school downstairs, you're going to find a book that directly references the events of Sword and Shield, setting Sword and Shield at least a year or so before these games. Talking about the mural getting destroyed by Copperaja, it's believed that this is the book of Sonia, the book that Sonia was writing at the end of Sword and Shield. And I think it's nice that Sonia didn't drop Bede in it, because that was totally Bede's fault. As we get towards the end game, as you look through the notes of Sarado and Chura, you realize that the other professor is actually canon to the opposite game, with Sada's diaries mentioning that he walked out, referring to Churro, and Churro's diaries referring to Sada walking out and disappearing. You might miss this because it's literally mentioned in one line of dialogue in the Team Stars quest, but Penny is actually from the Galar region originally. It said that back when Team Stars first formed up and one student took responsibility, they were returned home to the Galar region, and that's Penny. I wonder whereabouts she's from. Annihilate's very existence is a reference to old Primate Pokedex entries that talk about how Primate can get so mad it can die. And speaking of death, Rhyme, the gym leader, runs the town where you can find little lamps that have lantern shapes to them, which is really cool. I don't think Lampern's in this game, which is really odd because Greavid clearly is, and they are related to Litwick. Back to class with Miss Rhyfort, she mentions that it would be so cool if she could just have a time machine to go back in time to understand history. This is, of course, a direct reference to the end of this very game. It's a little nod ahead of time where you could have found out that actually a time machine is something that they're working on and is at the core of this game's story. You can also find the Scarlet and Violet book in the school, and drawings of legendary Pokemon and how they're thought to look, and I believe this to be a reference to the third Pokemon movie, in which there's a book filled with legendary Pokemon, but not as we know them to necessarily look today. They're just artist interpretations. If you're doing history class and Rifle asks you about the Great Expedition into the Great Crater of Paldea, and you mention that instead it was the Survey Corps who went down there, you'll learn that the Survey Corps did pretty similar work, and this is of course a reference to the Survey Corps from Pokemon Legends Arceus. Also in the book, you can find an image for what seems to be a big upcoming third legendary Pokemon that suggests that we are not done with the region yet. Not so much an Easter egg, just something that's really cool. I guess it's a reference to upcoming stuff. One of the teachers also seems to look a lot like Drayden from Generation 5. Now, I realized that not a lot of people agreed with me when I first pointed this out, so if you don't count this as an Easter egg, don't worry, there are some bonus ones at the end, but come on, really? No one else is seeing this? Speaking of character relationships, you can see the teacher Time in the hallway, and she'll mention that she thought you crept up on her like a ghost, or that she saw a ghost, and she is, of course, related to the ghost-type gym leader, Rhyme. Time and Rhyme. They literally rhyme, and both have connections to ghosts. After completing the game, you can find in your bedroom a photo with treasured friends, and this is of course the photo that appears at the end of the credits. The Joy-Cons on the Switch in your bedroom are of course the same Joy-Con colors as the Joy-Con that you are holding. This has appeared in pretty much every single Pokemon game since Pokemon moved to the Switch, other than Legends Arceus, because Legends Arceus doesn't have a Switch dock, because it's not set then. So other meta Easter eggs, you might notice that the Scarlet and Violet book is the game case. The little accents on the corner and the fact that Koraidon and Miraidon are on the cover, they're supposed to look like each other. You can even see in the trailers where they try to make the book become the game cases. Down in the Great Crater of Paldea, if we're playing Scarlet version, you might find Roaring Moon. This is a past version of Salamence, and according to its Pokédex entry, it directly references a phenomenon in another region, meaning this happens in a world where Mega Evolution exists, and of course it is referencing Mega Salamence. The future version of Tyranitar, on the other hand, Iron Thorns, is a direct reference not only to Mecha Godzilla in general, because Tyranitar is a reference to Godzilla, but also it is a reference to one of the movie Pokemon that you can battle in Generation 5. In the cave where you find Iron Valiant or Roaring Moon, you'll find some runes on the ground. These runes appear on the box art of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. As to what they mean specifically, we're not quite sure. You'll also find on the box art a little symbol of what appears to be a sextant, a item for navigation, and that can also be found in-game inside the Great Crater. It clearly has some importance because it can also be read about in the Scarlet and Violet book. And speaking of the Scarlet and Violet book, inside you can see references to a future what would appear to be downloadable content or something to do with the game, because in the book you can find this combined version of the legendary beast, which is super sweet in Scarlet, and the Swords of Justice, which is in Violet. And it's interesting to note that those two trios are kind of related in that all of the Pokemon in those trios share the same heights as the Pokemon from the opposite way. It's a really weird nod, that one. And this kind of final bonus Easter egg, I gotta give a huge shout out to Hybrid Hero for showing me this and helping me locate some of these Easter eggs. Missingo is referenced in these games, and no, that's not just a joke on how absolutely glitchy they are, but actually it's in the marketing for the games, not in the games themselves. In the trailer for Grieved, we see the camera stutter a little bit, and inside we can see a bunch of Missingo. And number 53, I was determined to keep this a flat 50, but there are actually some extra things in there, and I cannot believe watching this video back, I got all the way to the end and didn't mention that in the background of Mrs. Ryfort's class, you can literally see Professor Lavington and the old Pokeballs from Pokemon Legends Arceus. If you want more Easter eggs and secrets though, Scarlet and Violet really aren't the games for them. While there were some other small ones, like the hoops in Mesagoza City being the same as the ones in Hilbury from Pokemon Sword and Shield, I just really didn't feel like that was a cool enough Easter egg to include in this video, and certainly 50 is a nice round number. Oh, Pokemon Masters, Bookkeeper Toby here, and welcome back to Kids Kame. I'm just enjoying some sweet Diplin. Here's a Pikachu! Anyway, here in Kids Kame, there are secrets, Easter eggs, and treasures to be found. The hidden treasure perhaps of Area 0. Here are the Easter eggs I found. Enjoy the video. I'll tell you now, Pokemon Masters, that most of these secrets and hidden details are spoiler-free, apart from perhaps 9 and 10, which are only lightly spoilerific. Let's start, though, with a not-so-hidden detail, but a reference that comes up very early. In fact, so early, it's within the first sort of 5 to 10 lines of dialogue for the DLC, which is that the Blueberry Academy, from where Briar hails and the kids that are in Kitakame, yeah, it's in the Unova region. This is the kind of world building I really love in Pokemon. In Pokemon Sword and Shield, there really wasn't that much of this. Kabu was from Hoenn, but other than that, there was no characters crossing over or no other region or anything like that you could go and visit. But now we're going to the Indigo Disc, the Blueberry Academy in the next DLC after the Teal Mask, and we are going to the Unova region. This lines up with Drayton, very clearly them being the grandson of Drayden, the dragon gym leader of the Unova region, and sure enough, this skilled battler uses a dragon Pokemon, Archaludon, which looks like a bridge, a giant suspension bridge. So where Duraludon have evolved in the Galar region to look like tall skyscrapers, in the Unova region, they've decided to blend into their surroundings by looking like a bridge. This actually adds a lot of credence to the idea that number 2, Kitakame, is not part of the Paldea region. In fact, they say very early on, it's very far away, and when you travel there, you get a little icon of a plane, implying that this is a long flight away. But there's more than just this. I first came across this on Twitter, thanks to Joe Merrick, which is that there is a different clock depending on which map you are in. Each map is functioning on a different time zone. When it's daytime in Paldea, it's nighttime in Kitakame, which implies that they are so far away that they are in literally like opposite sides of the planet, different time zones. And it gets even better because we already know that there is a real-life Kitakame just south of Hokkaido, which is the area that inspired the Sinnoh region. We've got all of these references to Hisui that show up with our new character who's the descendant of Adaman. Call that a little mini Easter egg, though I think most people already know about that. She's got a little pet of Hisui and Growlithe, and we see Hisui and Growlithe statues. But on top of all of that, when you finally get to Kitakame and you've taken the plane and you've taken the bus for hours and hours, you're met by loads of Johtonian Pokemon and rice fields. Yes, this is very much Japan. I actually got to see a lot of areas like this when I was in Japan, but again, more on that when we get to the sponsor. Number 3, we also learn that Briar is the descendant of Heath, and she is wearing an outfit that looks very, well, Koraidon-Miraidon-y. She also mentions that she has the original manuscript of the Scarlet and Violet book, meaning there is stuff that didn't even make it to final print. Notes that he thought were so wild that people just wouldn't believe him. So hopefully we're going to get to learn more about this. What's fascinating though here is that her jacket has references to both Scarlet and Violet, and of course her color scheme of her whole outfit is Scarlet and Violet, meaning it may well be the case that actually in Heath's Scarlet book there are notes about the future Paradox Pokemon, thought so controversial, so wild that he didn't include them. Perhaps so then too, in the original manuscript for the Violet book, there are notes about ancient past Pokemon that he thought too controversial that only Briar knows about. Number 4, having a little vacation in the Kitakame area, we have this couple who are very eccentric and refer to you as a commoner. Clearly they are people of status, wealth, and money. You can follow them around the whole Paldea region. They actually return to Paldea after the very first battle. They say that they want to go and see the waterfall, and sure enough, they actually do so. You can chase them down a number of locations, and it's a great way of making some extra Poké Dollars, some Poké Yen, and some golden nuggets. They go by Onair and Billy, and as you continue to follow them around, they have all sorts of interesting insights. They talk about ripping up a lush area and building a business there. They have so much wealth. They refer to themselves as the glitterati. It's like they're just completely out of touch with reality. And Onair is constantly wanting to challenge you to a battle. This has led many on the internet to believe, and I kind of like this theory, that these are Nemona's parents. Nemona, much like her mother, Onair here, if the theory is to be believed, also loves battling. It's the one way that she gets to know people. And she comments in Area Zero that her parents are the CEO of some wonderful big Pokemon company. The Rotom Phone Company to be exact, and sure enough, at the very end of the quest line, we learn that Onair is in fact the CEO, which would certainly put her on the board. But what do you think? Could this be Nemona's parents? They don't really look alike. Number 5, this is a favorite Easter egg of mine. It's a super quick one. They did the same thing in Legends Arceus. I'm so glad for this attention to detail. All of the Nosepass are pointing north. This matches Nosepass's Pokedex entries, talking about how Nosepass always points north. So if you are anywhere in the Japanese Pokemon world, if you're in Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, or Kitakame, then your Nosepass will always be pointing north towards Sinnoh. Number 6, after the quite peculiar revival of the 3 so-called heroic Pokemon, they make their way to the Kitakame Hall. There they grab Ogerpon's mask and they scatter themselves across Kitakame. You have to find them and battle them, and you notice that they've gotten an awful lot bigger. It's interesting to note though that when they were at the Kitakame Hall, the locals mentioned that they actually fed these Pokemon with mochi. Mochi is a sort of Japanese delicacy. It's a nice treat. Filled with some of their favorite and finest herbs, and of course one of the other NPCs mentions that yes, they've probably grown big and strong since eating them, but I think they know what these herbs are. These herbs are the Herba Mystica, explaining why these Pokemon have become giant. This is just like the Titan Pokemon across the Paldea region who also become that size because they've recently consumed Herba Mystica. This is why this happens to these 3 Pokemon. Number 7, this is a very subtle detail, but it's one that I'm just particularly interested in. Throughout the story, Kieran is very, very interested in Ogerpon. He likes Ogerpon, and all the tales of this ogre that's monstrous that everyone should be scared of, he's not worried about it. But when he sees you riding Koraidon or Miraidon, he specifically asks you, is that some kind of kaiju? Suggesting the existence of a creature in the Pokemon world that is not a Pokemon, that is thought of as something different, a kaiju. Kaiju here in the real world are giant creatures like Godzilla and Mothra. In the Pokemon world though, it's unclear what this is referring to. Is this Gigantamax Pokemon? Certainly Koraidon and Miraidon don't look Gigantamax. It could be because these Pokemon are Paradox Pokemon, or at least in terms of the in-lore sense, they are Paradox Pokemon, just like Iron Valiant or Roaring Moon. Perhaps it's the case that when Kieran sees these Pokemon, he recognizes that these aren't normal Cyclizar, that no, there is something odd going on here. Not too dissimilar to Ultra Beast. To us, of course, they just look like different species of Pokemon, but to the people of the Pokemon world, they are oddities, something different. Then again, maybe he's referring to something else. If Kaiju is to be taken in the gigantic sense, perhaps he's referring to creatures like I mentioned in my theory about how the Kitakami Mountain may itself be an ancient giant creature that has fallen and become the mountain. It's just particularly interesting that the character that's the most interested in Ogerpon, a creature that seems to scare other people, finds your Koraidon or Miraidon to be a Kaiju, something odd. Something more noteworthy than just saying, huh, that's a strange Cyclizar. Number 8, in this DLC we get a new evolution for Applin, and it's Diplin, the sticky Toxfie apple Pokemon. I'm sorry I was eating it at the beginning of the video. And of course, Diplin has its new attack, Syrup Bomb. But did you know if your Diplin is shiny, as many people shiny hunted for an Applin before the DLC came out, and they've used this Syrup Bomb attack, it actually displays a different color for the Syrup Bomb in the animation. Number 9, and this is maybe where we're gonna get like a little bit spoilery, but we're still talking about minor spoilers. Number 9, at the very end of the DLC, Briar mentions that her and the kids must return to the Blueberry Academy because there has been some kind of development concerning the Great Crater. I can only assume that that development is somehow connected to something she learned while watching you take on Ogerpon in its many terrestrial forms. There is a deep connection to Area 0 at the top of Oni Mountain, where these crystal-like structures that can only be found in Area 0 grow, and it seems to be parts of this crystal structure that make up the 4 Ogerpon masks. The masks even having the little patterns in them that match the earrings of Briar, and of course, Terrapagos when it transforms into this new 19th Terra type. My suspicion is that it's your battle with Ogerpon that has made something click for her, and that's why there's been some development with Area 0. Because of course, if you go back to Area 0 after completing the DLC, nothing's changed. So she's had a thought about the Great Crater. I'd love to sit down with her and have a chat about what her Pokemon theories are. And number 10. There were theories for a long time that the champion of the Paldea region, Geeta, was some kind of villain, perhaps even an AI like Sada and Churro, because of course she was able to go down to the depths of Area 0 where so many people cannot go. How do we know this? Well, her ace Pokemon seems to be Glimmet or Glimora, but these Pokemon can now be obtained here as well in Kitakami. They lurk around the pool at the head of the Oni Mountain, which means that it's very possible that actually Geeta got her Glimmet or Glimora right here in Kitakami. Just by looking at the trailers we have, there are secrets, Easter eggs, and hidden little details that I think you're going to really love. Here are 10 of them that I got from just looking extra close. Also, number 1 is hidden in plain sight. It's the tree of Area 0. And this is there's a secret attached to this, which this is not the only special tree in Pokemon. I know trees have gotten a lot of slack over the last couple of years for how they look in the game, but believe it or not, going all the way back to the 3DS, trees have been very significant. There's going to be a little bit of theory dusting in this secrets and Easter egg videos because, as you well know, I have a theory that the 4 phenomena of the last couple of generations, Mega Evolution, Z moves, Gigantamaxing and Terastallizing, are all sort of connected by different energy. Well, did you know they all have a tree associated with them? In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, obviously it's the new Terrestrial tree. If you go back a generation, we have the Dynamax Hill tree in the Crown Tundra, a source of Gigantamax energy, and a Gigantamax Greedent lives up the top of it. On Sun and Moon and Ultra and Ultra Moon, you might be like, there's no special tree other than the Zerkat tree, but you'd be wrong. There's the Battle tree, which is the big battle facility. It is a ginormous tree and becoming giant as a result of, well, the energies. That's like part of Sun and Moon with Totem Pokemon. And then back in the days of X and Y, there are 2 special trees. There's the tree form that Xerneas, the life Pokemon, takes when it's resting, and there's the special tree in Sutopolis City where AZ's flower is planted. AZ, Area 0, it all comes full circle. All of these trees are similar, they're connected. Number Number 2, this one's a little bit more obvious. Drayton is obviously related to Drayden. They are both dragon-type Pokemon experts, one being a gym leader, one studying at the Blueberry Academy. I believe Drayton is his grandson, although may just possibly be his son. And the Pokemon he uses is Archaludon, which is a whole big reference to the Unova region, because of course the form that Archaludon takes is a bridge, and Unova is known for one thing specifically, and that is its bridges. Number 3, in the most recent trailer for the Indigo Disc, there is a small little tunnel, which seems to actually be in Area 0. If you look at the background, this looks like one of the new passageways in Area 0, where Galvantula and its pre-evolution, and Joltik live, but you can see in the background these electrified webs, which are of course the move Electro Web, which is, I believe, a signature move for these Pokemon, just there ready to trap people as like an overworld hazard. Number 4, one of the new features in this DLC is a synchro feature. You synchronize with your Pokemon and you're able to sort of control them from within their minds. Now, obviously, this is a wonderful idea that could explain a whole theory behind how Mystery Dungeon works, but we have actually seen this in the Pokemon world before. This is how Pokemon trainers must already communicate with Pokemon that they are kind of psychically bonded to. Like in the animated series, we see Annabelle able to give commands without saying a word. They're just in tune. They're fully synchronized, and I think that's what's happening here. Synchronize also makes sense for psychic Pokemon in particular, because it is an ability of a couple of psychic Pokemon. So my ability is that, yes, this new synchro feature, it's not got anything to do with 5Ds, it's all to do with psychically being bonded to the Pokemon. Number 5, we meet Cyrano, the leader of the Blueberry Academy. He is the principal and founder, and I suspect he may be treated as a little bit of a king, like royalty around the place, because he wears a scarf that matches the pattern on Honedge in Aegislash, a Pokemon that, according to his Pokedex entries, are deeply linked to kings and royalty. But in particular, doomed to fail royalty, so I wonder what that says about the story, or maybe the future after the Indigo Disc. Number 6, there's been a fun little launch event that's come out alongside the Indigo Disc, which is to do with Darkrai, Dialga, and Palkia. And if that Sinnoh combination sounds similar to you, with Dialga and Palkia being the max raids and Darkrai being the Pokemon that fights them, well then that's because there was, of course, a Pokemon movie. But the reason that they're referencing that Pokemon movie now is because Alamos, the city where it takes place, is based off of, I think, the cathedral in Barcelona that Messagoza City is also based off of. I'm including this just because the event kind of coincides with the launch of the Indigo Disc. I have to say thank you for Twitter for that one. That was Kai. Kai, you're wonderful. Kai's the very person who designed this. So there you go. Number 7, in the background of one of the shots with, I think it's Kofu and Larry, we can see what looks to be the fossil of Shieldon. That's kind of the whole Easter egg. However, not something we haven't seen before in Scarlet and Violet. In Scarlet and Violet, in Clavel's office, we also see fossils of Pokemon, including one that looks like an ancient Cyclizar fossil, which sort of tells us straight away that maybe Koraidon and Miraidon are not what they see. Number 8, at the very minimum, we'll get Raging Bolt and Iron Crown, but I suspect we'll also, of course, be getting the Entei and Terrakion future and past variants. And did you know that these two groups of legendary Pokemon are connected, the Swords of Justice and the legendary beasts, by height of all things? Virizion is as tall as Suicune, Cobalion as tall as Raikou, and Entei is as tall as Terrakion, but none are as tall as Raging Bolt anymore. Number 9, Ditto taking the shape and form of cubes across the Blueberry Academy. This is really, really interesting to me because while we have seen Ditto take the form of inanimate objects before, it's not something we see often, and additionally, I believe that these blocks are made up of the kind of gemstones that are at the core of Area 0. It's a special life energy inside of these cubes that allows life to form, and so I think what's happening here is Ditto is copying what it thinks is life. This is also just this game's version of like the Diglett hunt from the Isle of Armor, for example, so there's that. At number 10, this is my favorite one. I briefly mentioned Larry earlier. We've got a new character called, is it Mr. Snackums? Snackman? Snacksworth, Mr. Snacksworth. I believe he is related to Larry. Yes, they got similar shirts with just an inverse of like the tie and shirt and that kind of thing, and maybe they've just got the same tailor. But if you really think about it, Larry, not only his gym, it's not actually his gym, it's a restaurant he likes to visit. He's not even officially really a gym leader there, he's just kind of temporarily working as a gym leader there. Normally, he's an Elite Four member, or sometimes he's called up to be an Elite Four member. Doesn't really matter. The point is, it's not actually his gym, and that building has on it a poster for the teal mask. It has a poster for the Kitakami celebration. So it seems whoever's gym it is very well traveled. And here we see Snacksworth, the person who knows all of the lore of the legendary Pokemon, And of course, he's called Snacksworth, so he's all about food. In fact, the way that you get access to these legendary Pokemon is through particular meals, and there is a secret menu in Larry's gym, which is how you get additional Terra Shards. So I definitely think there's a relationship here. And then number 11, kind of a bonus one, maybe the last Easter egg and secret I'll ever do here on the channel. That's the design of Terrapagos itself. A big blue tortoise with a wispy tail that's ancient and forever. Yeah, this may be somehow connected, and again, it's more of a theory than it is an Easter egg, to Wartortle, one of the first Pokemon we ever got, a blue tortoise with a big, long, wispy tail, based off of, I'm assuming, similar mythos. Wartortle has always had Pokedex entries talking about how it's been able to live for over 10,000 years. Perhaps now those Pokedex entries make sense if Wartortle was mistaken for Terrapagos, but that's more of a theory. Starting off strong, we have number 1, time travel. At the very beginning of the game, you are the player character from Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, or Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl being sent back in time by Arceus itself. Here's the thing though, Arceus actually says that if you seek out all Pokemon, thou shalt find me again. And this might be a very straightforward piece of dialogue in which Arceus is saying that if you find all of the Pokemon, great, you will speak once more. Or it could be a reference to the fact that this game is set after the events of Diamond and Pearl from the player's point of view, and it's possible that the player may have encountered Arceus already in the Hall of Origin event that hopefully we will get for Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl a little bit later on this year. Meeting our first new character, we have Professor Leventon, and all of the characters in this game appear to be ancestors of pre-existing characters, and it seems to be the case that Leventon is the ancestor of both Hop and Leon of the Galar region. We know Hop's ancestry dates back to the old Sinnoh region because in his room we can find a Krogunk statue, a statue that we can also find in Pastoria City in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Now if you're anything like me, you might recognize the shirt that the player character is wearing, and that's because if you're playing as Lucas, your shirt is from the Kalos region, and if you're playing as Dawn, it's from the Galar region. Professor Leventon mentions the fact that Pokemon have the incredible ability to shrink down to a minuscule size, suggesting that their ability to shrink is not because of the Pokeball, but actually something inherent in Pokemon, which is an insight into how Pokeballs work, because we haven't had a lot of that. Professor Leventon tells us that the Pokeball is a pretty recent invention, and actually Jubilife Village is only said to be 2 years old, implying that the invention of the Pokeball allowing humans and Pokemon to coexist more safely has allowed for the development of this entire city. Professor Leventon also mentions the Pokedex, saying that we in the field call this a Pokedex, suggesting that there is a field of scientific research and other professors out there with other Pokedexes, perhaps a nod to future Legends games. Number 7, obviously the name Jubilife Village is a reference to Jubilife City, and there is the same musical themes playing throughout. I'm not going to mention every musical theme that repeats itself throughout this game, otherwise this would be a twice as long list, but yes, it's implied that Jubilife Village one day becomes Jubilife City, but that's actually not so because of number 8. The first thing Laventon tells you when you're walking down the street is that this is Canala Avenue, as in Canalave, and based on this village's position on the map, it would actually make more sense that this village would one day become Canalave City. And perhaps Jubilife City just expands a little bit further into the Obsidian Fieldlands. If you look up as you enter the gate, you will see a giant ceramic bell, which looks a lot like the bell Pokemon of ancient Sinnoh, Bronzong. I also recognize another Pokemon in the architecture, and that is the pipes on the Galaxy Gang's building. They look an awful lot like where Leventon is from, the Galarian Wheezing. This is interesting because it just implies that wheezing and Galarian wheezing and coughing existed in olden times, and they're not a modern Pokemon created by some kind of Team Rocket science. Speaking of the Galaxy Gang headquarters, of course, the Galaxy Gang is a giant reference to Team Galactic. Their logo is the same, and it would seem that this organization will one day move on to become the evil organization that Cyrus rules. In the garden nearby, we can meet a character called Colza, who is clearly the ancestor of the plant-loving Gardenia, gym leader of Eterna City. Another NPC will tell us that human weapons are no match against the fangs and claws of Pokemon. Now, this is very specific wording here, because one, it implies that humans do use or did use weapons to fight Pokemon, but there's actually a myth in Sinnoh called the Veilstone myth that refers to a human going around with a sword smiting Pokemon, until one day a Pokemon speaks to them and says that with fangs and claws they will exact their toll. On a much calmer note, number 14, there is an NPC who mentions that the Galaxy Gang don't seem to be doing much. What are they doing in there? Making a potato dex? And this may well be a reference to Galar's curry dex. In the corner of the village, we can find a little shrine with a particular shape to it, and of course this is a shrine to the mighty type null. No, okay, obviously not, it's Arceus. We meet a few more townspeople like Choi, who is the ancestor of Charon of Team Galactic, implying that somewhere along the lines, his ancestry joins the Galaxy Gang. We can also meet Anthe, the clothier, who is the ancestor of Darroch. Darroch's an interesting character and quite obscure because while they are a frontier brain, they're actually battling on behalf of Caitlyn, who would later become a Unovan Elite Four member. Also in Jubilife Village is the Pokemon pastures where you deposit your Pokemon. This might be a reference to how you use the daycare in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, which is the Solaceon Ranch. However, it might also be a reference to My Pokemon Ranch on Wii, which was a Pokemon box system. Number 19, before heading into the Galactic Gang headquarters, we also meet Benny, who is yet again an ancestor of a modern character, but you don't find out until much later in the game when he reveals that he has a ninja-like strength. This immediately makes us think of Koga in his pose, but actually if you look at his hair and notice that one of his aces is Gallade, you might realize that he's actually also the ancestor to Wally, meaning Koga and Wally, and of course Janine, Koga's daughter, are all related. Number 20, this one is a fun one. So of course you're playing as either Lucas or Dawn in this game, but you also have an ancestor counterpart, Akari or Ray, and if you play as one, then your ancestor doesn't exist. Let me explain. If you choose to play as Lucas, then Lucas's ancestor Ray doesn't exist. But if you choose to play as Dawn, then Dawn's ancestor Akari also doesn't exist. This might imply that because at the end of the game you close the space-time rift, that your player character actually stays back in time and becomes their own ancestor. Yeah, let's not think too hard on that. Number 21, we meet Captain Silene, who is of course the ancestor of Cyrus, unless Cyrus also did some time traveling shenanigans that we still don't know about. But what we do know about from the plot is that Silene is a hero and is on the goodies team. This role reversal from Cyrus is actually a nod and a hint to the twists and turns that come with some of the other characters. Now, when we first see the space-time rift open up, we see these RGB lights coming out, and this is actually a reference to when Cyrus opened up time and space at the end of Diamond and Pearl, and we see those same RGB lights. Perhaps the space-time rift distortion is being caused somehow by Cyrus's actions in Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, Brilliant Diamond, or Shining Pearl. If you head around the Galactic Gang headquarters, you can also find your way to the medical core, and there you will see the origin of all Nurse Joys. But she's not just related to Nurse Joy, she's also related to the companion character from Diamond and Pearl, Miri, because they have the exact same hair. Also, a small and very missable detail is number 24. If you have a look at all the coat racks around the building, they're made out of Stantler's antlers, or certainly designed to at least be the same shape. Let's hope that that's the case and that they're not actually Stantler's antlers. Number 25, we also meet Volo, who is the ancestor of Cynthia, and given what we know about him at the end of the game, he's clearly just testing your strength here. The first main area you'll explore is the Obsidian Fieldlands, and it's interesting that it's called that given that there aren't that many volcanoes in the Sinnoh region, but we find out later in the game that Lake Verity actually used to be a volcano, meaning this whole area would have been covered in volcanic glass, making it the Obsidian Fieldlands. You'll then have to report to Commander Kamado, who is of course Professor Rowan's ancestor. There's another little tidbit here that I find really interesting. If you have a look at his desk, you'll see a picture of him with what looks like perhaps a wife, a partner. I wonder what the story is there. You also learn how to craft Pokeballs from apricorns, which is a reference to Kurt, the apricorn Pokeball maker from the Johto region. He is the last person who remembers how to make Pokeballs in this way before they're mass produced. And of course, this provides for a whole variety of new Pokeballs, just like we get in this game. Now, based on everything we know about the map, this makes complete sense. If you look at the northwestern side of the map, you see the Florio Gardens, which of course will be the inspiration for Falroma Town in the future. In fact, if you've done the little shaman event that comes with the game, you'll realize that that allows all of these flowers to bloom, and this is a desolate part of some hill, which is an event that's actually referenced in Diamond and Pearl as being the home of Falroma Town. So yes, this area becomes Falroma Town. We'll eventually go over the entire map throughout this, but I want to go through this in the order that the game happens. So next we meet Diamond Clan's Mai, who is the ancestor to Marley, again one of the companion characters from Diamond and Pearl. Mai is the guardian of Weirdeer, which is described to be like the ride Pokemon of Alola by Professor Laventon, implying that ride Pokemon actually existed in this time. I wonder what they used instead of the Pokeride Pager. Perhaps another magical flute? Next up we meet the clan leaders Adamant and Iridia, and these are the only two characters in the whole game that appear to be completely original characters. characters, and their ancestry is very hard to place. However, their outfits do hint at one thing, that they will ultimately be the holders of the orbs for Dialga and Palkia, with a little pearl on Iridia's outfit and a little diamond on Adaman's. An ancestry I did recognize though is Sanquia, who is in the Galactic building. She seems to be the ancestor to Karen of the Elite Four of Johto. There is also the Orburrow Tunnel, which is very clearly the Orburrow Mine. Now this is right down next to where Kleavor is, and that makes sense because number 35, Kleavor's tools were said to be used, according to the Pokemon website, by the old people of Hisui, and in the Orburrow City in Diamond and Pearl, we actually see in the museum a whole bunch of stone tools. Kleavor's warden is Leon, who is the ancestor to Clay, and you can finally look to playing the Celestia flute, which of course is the thing that becomes one day the Azure flute, and this can actually be seen in the modern day spear pillar in Diamond and Pearl. Now, while the entire game is a reference to The Legend of Zelda, clearly taking inspiration from many of the tropes, the Drifloon balloon race in particular reminds me of riding around the ranch on Epona's back, shooting at things with arrows from horseback. Clearly the way that the music changes seems to take inspiration from elements of Zelda just like this. Number 39, lots of the names of the various NPCs are puns, like Baggin, who will expand the size of your bag. He helps you get stuff in your bag. There's also the lady who gives you the Spiritomb quest, and her name is Vessa, as in vessel, as in being possessed by Spiritomb. This might explain the actions of the Karate Man in Diamond and Pearl, who says, "Hush, don't say anything, takes this," and gives you an odd keystone. Arezu is of course the ancestor to Commander Mars. Ginter is the ancestor to Volkner, and we also meet Thule of the Ginkgo Guild. I've realized there's actually several named characters in the game who take on this appearance, so this might genuinely just be a random NPC. They do look kind of like Bianca or Greta though. At this point in the story, number 43, you actually have access to a special shiny Pokemon that is guaranteed in every run, and that is a shiny Ponyta. Now, I believe the reason that they chose Ponyta for this game is a reference to the fact that this is a game about special legendary horses. We see this with Dialga and Palkia's new forms, as well as Arceus itself being very equine, and in the last DLC we also just got Calyrex and Spectria and Glastria. So horses all around for this generation. Also, the new shiny Rapidash is a little bit more purple than usual. Entering the Crimson Mirelands, we immediately realize that we are exploring the marshlands of Sinnoh. This is the areas that will become Pastoria City, the marshy routes, the Safari Zone, and perhaps also Mr. Backlot's mansion is somewhere around here. We also find ourselves visiting the Solaceon ruins that even predate Legends Arceus, which is absolutely fascinating. These ruins were built in joint by the people of Johto and the Sinnoh region, or rather the Hisui region. Number 46, we meet a group of bandits called the Misfortunes, a female-only group consisting of Charm, who is the ancestor to both Agatha and Bertha. Their likeness has been described by other characters in the Pokemon universe, but this is kind of finally tying them together, with both of her aces being a Gengar for Agatha and a Rhydon for Bertha. Coin is the ancestor to Commander Saturn, and Clover is the ancestor to Candice, the Ice Gym leader of Sinnoh. In the Diamond Camp, we also see someone worried about a group of Psyduck who won't move, who have a headache. This is a reference to in Diamond and Pearl, the group of Psyduck that you have to move with the secret potion. Number 50, in the Shrouded Ruins, we find a giant odd keystone. Now, at first I wanted to think that this would one day become the Hallowed Tower, but that actually doesn't make sense based on its positioning. In fact, based on its positioning just below Lake Valor, there are no ruins that are out that way, so this is an entirely new area. But of course, the giant odd keystone is a reference to Spiritomb and the keystones in general. And speaking of map positionings, when you get out to the Colboat coastland, the Veilstone Cape is not where it should be, and we know this based on its relationship to the Sendback Spring, which is another Easter egg, of course referencing the Turnback Cave and Send-Off Spring from Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. But the Veilstone City is above that in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, meaning the Veilstone Cape is simply where the town got its name. We also know this because in Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, we actually learn how Veilstone was made by a bunch of meteorites crashing down and making way for this city. So clearly this is where they got the name Veilstone from. It is at this point in the game we also have access to the Turnback Cave and Send-Off Spring that look almost identical to their original appearance in Diamond and Pearl. Number 53 and 54, we also meet Paulina and Izcan. These are two characters that are incredibly hard to place. I think Paulina may be an ancestor to May, given that they have the exact same headwear, but that's really about all I've got. Iscan I believe to be an ancestor of Nessa, but this is only because on the official art, Iscan has this pose with his finger to his mouth, and I seem to remember something from Sword and Shield that had Nessa doing the same pose, but now I'm not quite sure I'm remembering that right. So if you have recommendations for who either of these characters might be related to, please let me know in the comments, but I think these are my closest best guesses. Now, I've mentioned comparing the Hisui region to the Sinnoh region's map a few times, but let's quickfire a few locations. We have Fire Spit Island, which is of course Stark Mountain, and now that we have access to surfing on Bastia Legion, we can visit Romanus Island in the Obsidian Fieldlands. This is the area that will become the Romanus Park, and what the Romanus Park is named after. That makes sense because it is to the right-hand side of the Sandgem Flats, which will be Sandgem Town in the future, and north of that we obviously see Lake Verity, as I mentioned earlier. But to the far right of this, to the far east, we see the Moss Rock, where you can evolve an Eevee into a Leafeon, and lots of people would assume that that means that this area will one day become Eterna Forest, and the music is even a little bit in tandem with that, but I don't think that can be the case, because this Moss Rock is located further south than Romanus Island, which makes no sense, and in relation to Romanus Island, the Obero Mine is exactly where it should be, meaning Eterna Forest must be elsewhere. We now have Lake Valor accessible to us, which given its location in relation to the marshlands makes complete sense. Number 60, we meet Ingo, and Ingo is like you, having fallen through the space-time rift. Ingo is not an ancestor to anyone. Ingo is from the games Black and White and Black and White 2, where he runs the battle subway. While you're in town, you can go to the Clothier, and there's actually a whole bunch of little clothing Easter eggs and references, but the main one I'm going to focus on is the classic Galactic set, which is obviously a reference to Team Galactic's uniform. How this outfit got there, though, I have no idea. Maybe it's just meant to be a little Easter egg and nothing more. Number 62, though, and I actually didn't realize when exactly this popped up during the game because it's not there at the beginning, but you can also find the Sevi Kitchen, a location that is only described on the map as being the Sevi Kitchen, referencing of course the Sevi Islands of the Kanto region, but ultimately this building is inaccessible. How strange. Number 63, heading to the Cornet Highlands, we see Melly, who is the ancestor to Avery from the Sword and Shield DLC. He's using a bunch of poison Pokemon, just like his Galarian Slowbro Ace in the Sword and Shield DLC. And when you enter the Cornet Highlands, Leventon mentions that there is a strong magnetism about Mount Cornet, and that may well be a reference to how Pokemon evolve via magnetism in these areas like Magneton into Magnezone. Before getting up to Mount Cornet, though, you have to go through the Wayward Cave, another location from Diamond and Pearl. It's interesting to note that your path to the Wayward Cave actually dips down, which would make sense as being the area that the cycling road would have been built on top of. While in the cave, Ingo opens up about his past, mentioning that he had a partner Pokemon that was very fiery. He's referring to his Chandelure, one of his aces. He also mentions a man that looked like him, and this is his twin brother, Emmett. I wonder what Emmett's doing now. At the very end of the Wayward Cave, he says that this is the cave's terminus. Now, whether this is a reference to Kalos's Terminus Cave is very debatable, but I do find it interesting given that the Terminus Cave has a bunch of disused train tracks in it, and this is Ingo, the leader of the battle subway, and all of his speak is train speak. Number 69, I just have to jump a little bit further in the plot here because I messed up my ordering, but we learned that in the Pearl Clan tents that there are a thing called snow goggles that the Pearl Clan uses to keep snow out of their eyes, though we don't see any Pearl Clan member wearing a pair of these apart from Iridia, who doesn't live in the snowy area, but she's just got them with her. The final thing to note about Ingo is that Ingo remembers HMs, hidden moves from the future, which of course they had in the Unova games. Number 71, I mentioned earlier that the Eterna Forest was probably elsewhere from the Obsidian Fieldlands, and if we were to head north from there, we would end up in the Cornet Highlands on the far western edge. And on the far western edge of the Cornet Highlands, there's this strange cemetery where we can find Misdreavus, which is a Pokemon that you can find in Eterna Forest. And you can also find Rotom there, and of course Rotom is known for existing in that area. Based on the relation of everything else, this to me makes sense to be the location of the one day Eterna Forest and the Old Chateau. That's because number 72, if you walk east from here, you will find a number of statues of Dialga, Palkia, and a broken statue of Giratina. This is the area that will one day become Eterna City, north of the Wayward Cave and the cycling road, and just sort of next to Mount Cornet. The statues even resemble the final statue of the combined Dialga and Palkia that we see in Diamond and Pearl. Number 73, after battling the Noble Electrode, we actually have Adamant create Sinnoh Myth. Adamant directly quotes something that appears as the Sinnoh Myth in Diamond and Pearl in the Canalive library. He's making it right here. Number 74, we enter the icy north of Sinnoh and we meet Gartic, who is clearly the ancestor to Crash Awake, but perhaps also Wulfric of the Kalos region, and I love the idea that those two are in fact related. We also see Sabi, who a lot of people are pointing out is the ancestor to Cheryl. Look at her green hair from the Sinnoh region, but I also think she might be an ancestor to Hapu of the Alola region, again suggesting that these characters are related. We also have access to Lake Acuity, which is a fascinating landmark, and it's right where it should be, next to number 77, the Snow Point Temple, a special area that in Diamond and Pearl you can encounter Regigigas. This means that the area next to this, where the Pearl clan has a settlement, will one day become Snow Point City. Number 79, the Snow Point Temple actually contains statues of a number of indistinct golems, but if you count their eyes, these are golems representing Registeel, Ice, and Rock, which is why they're holding those emblems, and it just makes me wonder, why did they introduce Regieleki and Regidrago Dark this generation if they weren't going to do anything with them? Right, before I move on to the later stages of the game, again, big spoiler warning, I'm just going to take a moment to cover a few more characters' ancestries who you may have noticed I've missed. Number 80, there's Teo Hua, who is downstairs in the Galaxy Gang. I cannot, for the life of me, work out who this person is related to. The best guess I had based on the way that he stands is that it's Faber of the Alola region, but I'm honestly not sure. There's also Zizu, who thanks to the help of my friend Hybrid Hero pointed out that this is the ancestor to Flint and Buck. Flint and Buck are related in the Sinnoh games, and Buck has this thing where he swings his arm, and Zizu does exactly that. There is also finally Kalaba, who is one of the earlier wardens. She's an old lady who's 99 years old, and this is the other character that I'm just stuck on. I've heard some people say that perhaps she's related to Mina. Personally, I don't see it. Perhaps also she could be related to Ramos of the Kalos region, the grass gym leader, but again, I'm just not quite convinced. Usually the connections are more obvious than this, so if you know who this is the ancestor of, please let me know, and sorry to kind of cut the list one short. Right, on with the big spoilery stuff. Number 83, we see the ancient campsite. This is of course the location of Celestic Town, one of the oldest settlements in all of the Sinnoh region. There we meet Miss Kogita, or Kojita, I think it's Kojita, who is an ancestor as well to Cynthia, part of Cynthia's bloodline, just like Volo, although it's interesting that they never reference the fact that they're related, Kojita and Volo, which kind of suggests that maybe there's something else going on here. We'll have to find out perhaps in some future DLC. This will make sense though that perhaps it was Miss Kojita who created the murals in what one day would become Celestic Town at the base of the mountain, referring to the lake spirits and creating the red chain, because of course that is what she sends you off to do. And while in the lakes, number 85, this is a classic Diamond and Pearl Easter egg as well, the circles of water on the floor reference the locations of the other lakes throughout Sinnoh. Now, number 86, I mentioned earlier that it turns out that Lake Verity was a volcano. We actually also learned that Lake Valor may have also been a volcano once, but its origins are debatable. The only one that's not referenced as being a volcano at some point is Lake Acuity up in the north. However, that weirdly is the one that should be a volcano, because there are legends in the anime that describe Regigigas protecting Snow Point City from an ancient volcano, though I suppose that may just be a reference to Fire Spit Mountain. This is because Snow Point City doesn't exist yet, it's just the Pearl Clan settlement. Now, number 87, the items that you obtain from Azelf, Uxie, and Mesprit are the Plume, Fang, and Claw, and once again we may have a reference to the Veilstone myth here. The Veilstone myth directly references a Pokemon speaking to a person who's been slaying Pokemon with a sword and says that if you keep doing it, we'll have to exact our toll with fangs and claws. Here we've got a fang and a claw, and Pokemon that are seen speaking directly to the minds of people before, as the myth says, disappearing to a place beyond seeing. Number 88, Commander Kamado begins his expedition up Mount Cornet and leaves Silene in charge. It is perhaps this power structure that allows for one day Silene's bloodline to inherit the Galaxy Gang, and thus how Cyrus gained control of Team Galactic in modern day. We also meet a Lucaria trainer named Rai, who is of course a reference to the, again, companion character from Diamond and Pearl, Riley. Number 90, moving away from the story a little bit, we have an actually really interesting view on the Pokemon Pokemon timeline here, because it is mentioned, according to modern Pokedex entries, that Spiritomb was sealed away 500 years earlier. In this game, you pick up all of Spiritomb's lost spirits and tie them to an odd keystone, so perhaps this game is 500 years ago. However, I don't think so, because when you're given the quest, the person who gives you that quest, Vesta, says that hundreds of years ago, magic was used to seal this creature to the odd keystone. If she is referring to the 500 years ago date that the modern Pokedex references, then that means that this game has to be happening no later than 300 years before the modern Pokemon games. It can't be any later than that, because otherwise she wouldn't say hundreds of years ago Spiritomb was sealed, given that we know from modern day it's 500 years ago. I hope that makes sense. I'll try and make a timeline video at some point. Number 91, back to the story, we see that Commander Kamado's is the same as Wickstrom's of the Elite Four of Kalos, implying that they are from the exact same place. I'm actually going to circle back to that in a minute. Number 92, we see that the Primeval Grotto has fossils, just like in the Sinnoh Underground in BDSP, the giant Bastiodon fossil. It seems to be a nod to that. Also, while you're in the Primeval Grotto, take a look at all the nose pass. If you don't get too close to them, they will always turn and point north, which is a wonderful addition. Cool little Easter egg, reference to their Pokedex entry, how they always face north. Unless, of course, you're distracting them. Let them get back to pointing north. Number 94, underneath this piece of Sinnoh, this Primeval Grotto, we can also find the Primal Ore. This may be a reference to how in the Grand Sinnoh Underground in Birlliant Diamond Shining Pearl, especially at the center of the map where Celestic Town is, not too far away from this, there is a giant gemstone, but I don't know, maybe that's just a theory waiting to happen. Number 95, when under pressure, Commander Kamado's accent completely breaks, revealing a Galarian accent, and this is confirmed in the post-game when he mentions that the armor that he's wearing is a classic, traditional Galarian armor, suggesting that he is from the Galar region originally before coming over and creating the Galaxy Gang, and also that Wickstrom, who speaks in Old English, is also from the Galar region, so that theory is confirmed. The Origin Ball. Now, obviously they couldn't do the Master Ball in this game because the Master Ball was created in modern day by Selfco, but this Origin Ball does look familiar, and I think it is a clear reference to the origin of the Cherish Ball, the event item only Pokeball that allows you to, well, have event only Pokemon. Number 97, this Origin Ball is the only Pokeball in the whole game to shake 3 times, referencing all future Pokeballs going forward. Number 98, right at the end of the game, the player character looks back and reminisces over Spear Pillar, much like Professor Rowan did in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Now, before I move on to the big post-game stuff, number 99, if you go into the tents of the Diamond and Pearl clans, you're going to see some pictures. One of a guy with red hair, one of a guy with blue hair, and one of a guy who looks a lot like Alder from Generation 5. It's thought that this might be the hero of myth that is later described, and that perhaps this is some kind of reference to a future Legends Unova game. But as for the red-haired and blue-haired fellow, are these ancestors to Archie and Maxie? Hybrid Hero seems to think so. I'm not as sure at the moment, but let me know what you think in the comments. And now we're going to move on to the post-game. Number 100. In the post-game, you can catch the mythical Pokemon Manaphy, and of course its predecessor, Phione. There we learn that Manaphy is described as the Sea Prince, which is a reference to the Manaphy movie where it is described as the Prince of the Sea. Number 101, though, in order to access this Manaphy, you need to go to an area that was once called the EC Hollow. This is a reference to Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl that introduced the Seas Legend, a book in the Canalive library that refers to the Seas Hollow, and in order to access this area you need an oversized Quillfish, an Overquill, a Mantike, and a Buizel in your party to enter the EC Hollow. What's interesting to note here is I think a lot of people are going to think the book in the Canalive library, the Sea Legend, is actually talking about the player character finding Manaphy, but that's not true because Iscan mentions that the book already exists in the time of Legends Arceus. Moving into the post-game, you battle a Vespiquen who is a very angry alpha Vespiquen protecting one of the Arceus plates, and at first that seems like a random choice for a boss, given that the rest of the Pokemon in this quest are legendary Pokemon. What if I told you it's not random at all, but is instead a reference to the Gigantamax Vespiquen from the Isle of Armor DLC? 103, we learned from Kojita in the post-game that before the people of Hisui were around the Diamond Clan, the Pearl Clan, it was her people who were the people of Sinnoh, who created the Temple of Sinnoh, hence where the Sinnoh region will one day get its name. And this happened a millennium or two ago, which is a really interesting date in the Pokemon world, because we know that 3 millenniums ago there was the AZ Ultimate Weapon and the Darkest Day, but there were still many events that were happening around that time, such as the construction of the Abyssal Ruins and the Dragon Spiral Tower. Number 104 and 105, we see the Adamant Crystal and the Lustrous Globe. These two items, of course, will one day become the Adamant Orb and Lustrous Orb, much smaller versions of themselves, implying that this item can get smaller and perhaps referencing the Pearlescent and Prism orbs that can be found in the Sinnoh Underground in Diamond and Pearl. Clearly, these orbs can go from being very, very powerful to very, very weak. After you battle Commander Kamado at Prelude Beach, he is the one who suggests that perhaps the region should in fact be called the Sinnoh region, thus giving the region its name for the future. And Volo does the exact same at Spear Pillar, saying that the pillars are like spears piercing their heavens, and hence where the name Spear Pillar now comes from. Now, big twist at the end, 108, Volo turns out to be the villain at the end of everything, and we learn that Volo's plan is exactly the same as Cyrus, to use a legendary Pokemon, in this case Arceus, to destroy the universe and create a new universe. I mentioned at the beginning how the RGB lights that were coming out of the space-time rift were a reference to the RGB lights coming out of the rift that Cyrus created. Is it possible that Cyrus's intentions somehow ended up in Volo? We just don't know. We don't know, Lo. Number 109, Volo's team is exactly the same as Cynthia's, apart from her Milotic, which has been replaced with an Arcanine. Number 110, the Celestia Flute becomes the Azure Flute, the very same as the event-only item from Diamond and Pearl version, which allows you to access the Hall of Origin. And speaking of the Hall of Origin, number 111, if you seek out all Pokemon, you will be able to access an area via way of a kind of mystical glass staircase, which takes you to this space platform, presumably the Hall of Origin, and inside that you can see a sort of circle of creation. And on the center of the platform that you're looking at, number 112, there are these symbols, and these symbols might be recognizable from the Sinjoh Ruins event from Heart Gold and Soul Silver, where if you take your Arceus, it can create a Giratina, Dialga, or Palkia. Perhaps this is the place where Arceus watches on high and creates legendary Pokemon. Speaking of the Sinjoh Ruins, we see the architecture of a lot of the ruins, especially those in southern Sinnoh, or rather southern Hisui, are much like the same architecture that we see in the Sinjoh Ruins, and that makes sense because this area is the closest to the Johto region. We see in the Sinjoh Ruins event that Sinjoto, is between Johto and Sinnoh. So this area, it makes sense, and also as to why the Solaceon Ruins that feature the Unknown are here, because the Unknown are most closely tied to the ruins of Alph. And with those 112, I'm not quite done. I just wanted to go through some Pokedex entries that I thought were particularly interesting from the game. So let's get all the way up to 125, and I got a good one for the last one. Cricketot's Pokedex entry: when the trees take on new hues, more of these Pokemon appear. The tone they create by striking their antennae together resembles that of the marimba, an instrument of foreign lands. Now, the marimba in real life has its origins in Africa, and that's interesting because we haven't had a lot of Africa references in the Pokemon world at all. Most other continents have been referenced, but not Africa that much. So could this be referencing some kind of future Pokemon region? Number 115, not an Easter egg, just a cool one. According to Parasec's Pokedex entries, mushroom-lacking specimens of this Pokemon lie unmoving in the forest, lending credence to the hypothesis that the large mushroom is in control of Parasec's actions, which of course is a reference to the whole zombie Parasect. It's not the Pokemon, it's the mushroom theory. Number 116, Raichu's Pokedex entry: it can discharge bursts of electricity exceeding 100,000 volts. A single strike with that amount of power would incapacitate one of Copperaja of my homeland. Now, of course, this is being written from the point of view of Professor Leventon, whose homeland is the Galar region where Copperaja is from, but it's just interesting because in future Pokedex entries, future in terms of the timeline, it references an Indian elephant, which suggests that Copperaja is indeed from another Indian-based region. Number 117, Kadabra's Pokedex entry still reads that there are rumors that a child with mystical powers became a Kadabra. However, this remains unverified. I suspect that the spoon that Kadabra holds enhances its brainwaves, so this means that the theory about Kadabra being the result of an experiment in Silphco that I came up with last year, absolutely not the case. Number 118, Heracross. This Pokemon has an unparalleled horn. Heracross itself demonstrates tremendous power. It's capable of throwing several people trained in traditional arts of war at once, suggesting that people and Pokemon have physically fought. Warriors have fought Pokemon. Number 119, Gyarados. I suspect this Pokemon to be the true identity of a dragon written in ancient texts, which claimed that it raised an entire village with white-hot beams from its maw. Of course, its maw being its mouth, and the white-hot beams being hyper beam attacks, or perhaps dragon rage. This is a direct reference to Mahogany Town, the town at the northmost point of the Johto region, and just above it being the Lake of Rage, where Gyarados can be found. And it is said, according to the anime as well, that Gyarados once destroyed an entire village to create the Lake of Rage. And in fact, in the Space World demo for the Johto games, the Lake of Rage was an entire town. Number 120, Gardevoir. It will dedicate itself to defending a master it has come to adore. Its pure white dress is reminiscent of those worn by ladies of nobility. It is the dress of one who is willing to risk their life. Now, I find this super interesting because both Professor Leventon and Commander Kamado are from the Galar region. And right back at the beginning of this video, I mentioned that on his desk, there is a picture of a lady in a white dress. No, I'm not saying that that is a Gardevoir. I know the whole Sinnoh myth about marriage, but that is not what I'm suggesting here. What I am suggesting here is that Professor Leventon is directly referencing the tragic backstory of Commander Kamado, who had a wife who was once willing to risk their life. Perhaps this explains why Commander Kamado is just so stern and also fearful of Pokemon. Number 121, Pachirisu's Pokédex entry reads that it is related to the Pikachu line, and this is just interesting for the tree of evolution that I do here on the channel, because obviously it suggests that even though Pachirisu is a squirrel and Pikachu is a mouse, the fact is that all of these Pikachu clone Pokemon are clearly closely related. Number 122, Hisuian Electrode. The tissue on the surface of its body is curiously similar in composition to that of an apricorn. I did a video earlier this year explaining how Voltorb could be a grass type, and that perhaps it is the case that Voltorb was a plant-like life form before it became modern-day Voltorb related to Pokemon like Among Us, and this seems to verify that it is some kind of mutated apricorn that's come to life, or perhaps parasite on the apricorn. Number 123, Lucario, a most gallant looking creature. It emits energy waves and controls them with precision, using them to sense even faraway beings. I have given the name Aura to this power. Professor Leventon is responsible for the Aura Guardians being called the Aura Guard. You have Leventon to thank, Aura Guardian. Okay, just 2 more to go, but at this point, 36 minutes into this video, I wanted to say a huge thank you, because if you watched this far into this video and you're gonna watch all the way to the end, you're my secret audience. You make this channel happen. So a shout out to you. Let me know if you're still here and if there's any Easter eggs I've missed in the comments. Maybe they'll be the last 2 I cover, but I somehow doubt it. I'm sure I've missed a lot of things, and just thank you for the support and being part of this conversation, because I love talking about Easter eggs and secrets. So this next one is a Pokédex entry. It's less of an Easter egg. It's just something that I think is really, really cool, but I guess it ties into an Easter egg. And that is with my new relaunched channel mascot, Porygon. It has no discernible heartbeat, and it does not seem to draw breath, and yet it appears to function without issue. I cannot even begin to explain this utterly bizarre anomaly. Obviously, the way that Porygon can appear in the game is via way of the space-time distortions, and that explains anything coming from the future. Just like, I suppose this is an Easter egg, the link cable that allows you to evolve your trade-only Pokemon, because of course, in the original Red and Blue, they can only evolve via being traded over a physical link cable. And number 125. If you take your Ursaluna around the Hisui region and dig in the right spots, you are going to uncover ancient scrolls. These scrolls refer to the story of the ancient hero of Sinnoh from what would seem to be either a few hundred years ago or a millennia or 2 ago when the people of Sinnoh settled. This is the same hero who had the 10 noble Pokemon who appear in the Shrine of Sinnoh. And actually, as of recording this video, I haven't yet discovered all of the scrolls, but I'm sure I'll do a video on that in the future. They are faithful remakes. There are a couple of ways in which these remakes differ, and there are a couple of Easter eggs in there that I think might be references to Legends Arceus or things of more recent Pokemon history. There are at least 10 things that I found interesting in Birlliant Diamond Shining Pearl that aren't in regular Diamond, Pearl, or Platinum, or things that now mean something different. Okay, Pokemon Masters, let's start off towards the end of the game in Sunny Shore City, because there is a big difference between the Sunny Shore City of Birlliant Diamond Shining Pearl that changed over from Diamond and Pearl. See, in the world of Diamond and Pearl, something that always struck me as odd and never explained about Sunny Shore City is that there's this big stone munchlax, a heritage site according to the locals in Sunny Shore. No one knows why this giant munchlax shaped rock is there, who carved it, is it going to be in the Hisui region in Legends Arceus? I don't know. But it seems to have evolved between Diamond and Pearl and Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, now being a giant stone Snorlax. However, I don't think this is a case of someone went out and carved the Munchlax into a Snorlax, because there's more rock. Snorlax is bigger, which kind of says that maybe this is happening in, again, a parallel, different world from the regular Diamond and Pearl, as all version differences and remakes tend to be parallel universes anyway. And just in this one, whoever carved this, I guess their favorite Pokemon wasn't Munchlax, it was Snorlax. I see you, Ancient Team Snooze. Thank you. Before we move on to number 2, I want to do a very quick honorable mention Easter egg that I found really funny that I don't think I realized before, which is in Auburg City, inside one of the houses, there is a person talking about Pokemon nicknames. And there, where you're talking about Pokemon nicknames, they're saying that their Psyduck is called Yellow, and they think that's a ridiculous joke. They were named Yellow because of the color of the Psyduck. I'm pretty sure this is a reference to the fact that people are confused about the name switching between Psyduck and Golduck, with people thinking that Golduck should be the name of Psyduck because it's gold, it's yellow, and Psyduck being Golduck because it has access to more psychic powers. I don't know if in the original Diamond and Pearl, Rotom only had one form. It looked like this. In Pokemon Platinum, it got access to a bunch of new forms, and you could access them via way of a secret event item called the Secret Key. This would give you access to a hidden room in Eterna City's hideout, so it's a platinum only piece of content, but it remains in Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. And the way that you get the secret key is, rather than by an event, Rotom just drops it, so you immediately have access to all of its forms. I now just wish that Rotom was available earlier on in the game. I hate that it is a post-game only Pokemon. It is so fun to play through these games with a Rotom by your side. But what is interesting about this is inside Rotom's room, there are notebooks. A notebook, number 1, from the old Chateau, describing this history with Rotom. We've talked about it a lot on the channel before with theories. And this other notebook by Charon of Team Galactic. And that's interesting because Charon doesn't appear in these games. He was a Pokemon Platinum exclusive character who just didn't show back up for Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, but he's referenced in world as a member of Team Galactic. So does this mean we could be seeing some kind of future piece of content with Charon involved, or is this just a leftover from Platinum that they decided to keep and they didn't reword? I don't know what's going on here, but yeah, I guess maybe the future will tell, or maybe not. Number 3, very simple. I've done a theory about it already, but let's talk about the Romanus Park, the park at the end of the game that is replacing the Pal Park. And Romanus is named the Romanus Park because it is a type of flower, a type of rose. And if you've been following Pokemon YouTubers for the last 5 years, you'll probably know that flowers are a pretty big part of the Pokemon lore. There are a lot of characters named after different trees, plants, flowers. All of the professors are named after different trees. Obviously, in the last game, the big villain of the game was Chairman Rose, and his brother Peony, another type of rose, and now we have Romanus, a third type of rose. I'm thinking this probably isn't a coincidence. However, the theory that I did about it, that maybe Peony or Chairman Rose started the Romanus Park, has actually been debunked by some of you in the comments, and I have to agree with the debunking. There were things to do with Peony appearing in the Crown Tundra. I was like, he's there to hunt legendary Pokemon, but it turns out actually part of his story is he wasn't expecting to find legendary Pokemon, and I thought this hunt for legendary Pokemon tied in really well. Although, I don't know, maybe he got to the Crown Tundra and he then found legendary Pokemon and he was like, well, now we found them, we better catch them and take them to the Romanus Park. So, I don't know, maybe he still did start the Romanus Park, but I'm getting different thoughts on that. Anyway, that's theory territory. The Easter egg is simply the name. Easter egg number 4 involved with the Romanus Park, of course, is the Arceus slates. Now that's interesting. I can't remember why in my head I've got them down as the Arceus slates. They're just the Pokemon slates. They're just legendary Pokemon slates. I don't think Arceus has anything to do with it. Sorry about that. But the point is, you put these slates in pedestals and they seem to summon legendary Pokemon. Now this is interesting for a couple of reasons. Number 1, these slates are the shape of, for anyone who doesn't know this, and I think most of you know this, they're in the shape of Game Boy cartridges and DS cartridges, the cartridge that represents the era that the legendary Pokemon evolved was introduced. So the Genome cartridge, Mewtwo's one, that slate looks like a Game Boy slate because that was Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow, whereas the Rayquaza one, that looks like a Game Boy Advance game because Rayquaza first appeared in Pokemon Emerald. But this isn't too dissimilar to the Nintendo DS era games, like in Diamond and Pearl, where you could have Game Boy cartridges inside the bottom side of your DS, and they would allow certain Pokemon to spawn, or even in the Dream Radar DS download game, it was a 3DS download game, you could have certain Nintendo DS cartridges in your 3DS, and it would allow you to find certain legendary Pokemon, the box art legendaries from those games. It's definitely cool to see those in-game, a little bit harder to explain their design, but something I will definitely work on a theory for. I have a few things in mind. Number 5, this isn't a Birlliant Diamond Shining Pearl exclusive Easter egg, but it is one that I wanted to mention because I first discovered it playing through BDSP. I can't believe that I didn't realize this before. We actually get a lot of references to Pokemon timelines in this game. Professor Rowan has been studying Pokemon for over 60 years. That's the first number thrown out. Also, at the beginning of the game, we learned that Professor Rowan has been gone for 4 years. But on top of that, from a random Team Galactic scientist, we learned that he has been a Team Galactic scientist for 5 years, and he still hasn't been promoted. That means that Team Galactic is at least 5 years old, and 5 and 4 years are pretty close together. I wonder if Professor Rowan's disappearance had anything to do with him and Team Galactic? He does appear in the Team Galactic base after you do the Rotom Secret Key event. I wonder, Professor Rowan is the secret leader of Team Galactic? No, that's a theory, we're not gonna go there. But it is just kind of interesting to note, because as far as we know about the Pokemon timeline, while it is kind of variable, for example, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire and Ruby Sapphire and Emerald happen at different times on their respective universes' timelines. I've got to do a timeline update video after all this, don't I? The general consensus is that generations 1 and 3 are happening at the same time, and generations 2 and 4 are happening at the same time, and they happen a couple years apart, 2 or 3 years, which means Team Galactic has been going since before Red beat the Pokemon League and took down Team Rocket. Heck, Professor Rowan hasn't been in Sinnoh the whole time during the events of Red, Blue, Yellow, Fire Red, Leaf Green, Let's Go Pikachu, Let's Go Eevee, Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald. Rowan just wasn't in the lab. Where was he? Definitely food for thought. It's me just beginning to turn the wheels and create a theory. If you have any ideas, let me know in the comments. Now I'll get back to secrets, Easter eggs, references that are exclusive to Birlliant Diamond Shining Pearl. For example, number 6, with the updated graphics, we get to see a better look at the Hearthome City Church, and there on the front of it is this mural depicting I don't know what. I've had this sent to me on Twitter a number of times. There are so many people that have redrawn it and re-highlighted it in different ways, showing off that this could be an Arceus or Arceus forms. It does seem that there is this big mural inside the church that references Mount Cornet, and it would seem to be some kind of church to Arceus. So it being an Arceus form would make sense, but personally, I just think it's an intricate pattern. There are some Arceus motifs there, and I don't know, maybe we will see in Legends Arceus some new Arceus form that this is directly kind of referencing ahead of time, and if so, it's very, very cool, but as I see it at the moment, there's no way to know until that thing comes out. And I just don't know that it looks like anything yet, but you know, agree to disagree, I suppose. Number 7, speaking of timelines, and this is really, really interesting here. Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald version all featured the Battle Tower. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire did not feature the Battle Tower. In fact, it very mockingly featured a model of the Battle Tower saying, "Coming soon." Now we know that Mega Evolution is not in Birlliant Diamond Shining Pearl, meaning most likely if it's connected to any of the games, it's more likely to be connected to Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald than it is Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Which is weird because you kind of expect all the remakes to be in the same timeline, I guess, but I guess they're not. And that's fine, there's a multiverse, so there's lots of jumping. But, of course, in the Battle Tower, and I do think this was in the original game, there is a lady who references the fact that Hoenn also has a Battle Tower. That's where she's from, and there's a tower like that there. Now, back in the original Diamond and Pearl, that was just a reference to the fact that, yeah, Pokemon Emerald version, it had a Battle Tower. But we know for a fact that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire didn't have a Battle Tower made during the time that we saw it. So I think personally that connects Birlliant Diamond Shining Pearl's world to the world of Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald a lot more closely. That plus the lack of Mega Evolution to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. But again, it could be a whole new timeline entirely. It could be the Sword and Shield timeline, although no Gigantamax, but then that makes sense because I guess it's a Galar phenomenon. I'll be honest, I really did think they were gonna put Gigantamaxing in this game. Anyway, back to Easter eggs. Number 7. Absolutely everywhere in the Sinnoh region there is this painting. I believe it is a sort of like low-res version of Starry Night, which is a painting, a very famous Van Gogh painting. Whether it's supposed to be that painting or maybe it's supposed to be a totally different painting, maybe it's supposed to be like a reference to an upcoming Generation 9 region. I don't know. Personally, I won't read too much into it, but it is interesting to note that this picture is absolutely everywhere in the Sinnoh region. Though, might be a reference to absolutely nothing, because also everyone in the Sinnoh region has the exact same laptop screens and they're all watching the same stuff on TV on loop. So I don't know, maybe just asset recycling. Number 9, we have a brand new Sinnoh myth, and that is entirely new for Birlliant Diamond Shining Pearl. When you go to the Can Live library, there's a new book just about the Sea Prince, and I think we all know what the Sea Prince is. If you look at the legends and myths of the Sinnoh region, it's not going to be, you know, Dialga or Palkia, it's not going to be the Lake Spirits. It looks pretty likely that this is a reference to Manaphy, who is of course given away as a pre-order / early gameplay gift for playing Birlliant Diamond Shining Pearl, where the movie Pokemon Ranger in the Temple of the Sea specifically called him the Sea Prince as they're looking for the Sea Crown. It mentions the Eastern Sea, it mentions a Shellos, another Pokemon, and Quillfish with particularly big pointy spikes. I do wonder if this Quillfish could be one of the bigger Pokemon in Legends Arceus, and when it's talking about the East Sea in the ancient days, whether it's talking about the Hisui region. And that this Quillfish is maybe not a noble Pokemon, but one of the enraged bigger Pokemon that is more likely to attack. I don't know, just food for thought, but I think this is probably a direct reference to Legends Arceus. Maybe we're going to see a little bit of Manaphy action in Legends Arceus. Also, I have a theory about this. I'm working on it. You will see it soon. And number 10/10A, 10B, this is in 2 parts. I was going around the Auberg Museum because now all of the assets in there are like up-resed from what they were obviously when they were just pixel art, and I was desperately looking. I was like, come on, there's ancient tools in here. This has got to be some kind of reference to Cleavor, right? But as far as I can tell, the ancient tools in there don't look anything like any bits of stone from Cleavor, which, you know, in itself is interesting that they wouldn't put a reference there, because you'd kind of think that they would. Although maybe the fact that you can catch Scyther underground is a reference to Cleavor and the minerals in the ground that made it to... Anyway, I was also desperately looking at all of the Legends Arceus trailers, trying to find some connection points to the items that appear in those trailers, and there are some items that look similar. And in the back case, there are these crystals that look kind of like they could be, I don't know, star fragments from Zelda or Animal Crossing, but really I got nothing in the Auberg Museum, which is really weird because it seems like exactly the kind of place that they would put a reference or an Easter egg like this. However, it did remind me of the fact that, of course, up on Spear Pillar, they have made the image of the kind of gateway to Spear Pillar much more clear than it was in the DS era, and now it resembles a flute. The Azure Flute, which in the time of Legends Arceus looks a lot more like this image than it does, you know, in terms of the event item. Meaning that when this little floor carving was created in the world of Birlliant Diamond Shining Pearl, the Azure Flute looked like it did in Legends Arceus and not as it does in Diamond and Pearl. And those are just the first kind of 10 Easter egg secrets references. I do have others, but they kind of combine together to create theories or other videos, so I will talk about those in upcoming videos. By the way, there's no like definition to what I'm calling trivia here. There's no definition to what I'm calling an Easter egg or hidden secret. It's just basically 20 things that I find really interesting that I'm hoping you haven't noticed all of them. So with that being said, I suppose we just sort of jump into it with number 1, the Devon Corporation guy. There's Guy in Devon Corp in the original Ruby and Sapphire who says that they're working on making a machine that can look into the dreams of Pokemon. A cool idea that was actualized 2 generations later with the appearance of the Dream World and the Dream Radar game with Black and White. So that actually became a real thing, and then what's really awesome is when the games were re-released with Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the dialogue changes. He says that while he is working on it, there is a rival in another region who is also working on that technology, likely referencing either Professor Burnett, who was the professor from the Dream Radar game, or more likely Dr. Fennel, who is the kind of main Dream Pokemon researcher. Number 2, and this is just unheard of when it comes to Game Freak, when it comes to Pokemon, including fan stuff in there, but in Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, in Dewford Town, there is a little house where there's a particular image on the wall, and it's hard to tell at first, but when you zoom in, you realize exactly what it is. It is an image of the whole Pokey Earth. And it's not grabbed from nowhere, and no, it's not grabbed from my videos. And I'm not... The cat has just decided to let himself in. This is Hector, and look at his chunky belly. Oh, this is what you get for interrupting filming. Right, come on, off your part. Oh man, he's so confused. No, sorry, the Pokey Earth is the same Pokey Earth that appears on Cerebi.net on the website. Now, a little side story to this, before I met Joe, who runs Cerebi.net, Joe Merrick, I actually tweeted him, I DM'd him saying, hey, I'm doing a video working on the Pokey Earth and where I would place everything in relation to everything else using all the in-game evidence. Which, by the way, is a theory that I want to continue working on developing. I know it's been a while. I'm going to do some videos about it soon. And I said, I believe, like, and no offense to your amazing map, but I believe that mine is more accurate. Would you be interested in, you know, putting it up on Cerebi.net instead? And he was like, no. And now I completely understand why, because that map is in an actual Pokemon game, and that is so cool and such a nice little way for the Game Freak to say to the fans, hey, we're watching what you're doing. Cerebi, we like what you're doing. I think it's really cool. Okay, this one's kind of cool. I didn't even know this one until looking it up myself. Number 3, there's a house in Lily Cove City that has a bit of kind of Hawaiian-looking artwork on it with a giant palm tree. And I think now, retrospectively, given that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were the games right before X and Y, Sun and Moon, I think it's pretty safe to say that that's an Alolan Executor, and that was them doing a little bit of cheeky foreshadowing. Number 4, I've covered this one a few times, so I'm sorry if you know it, if you've been watching the channel for a while. It's an oldie but a goodie. In the Elite Four room, in Phoebe's room, there is, for several frames, as you're engaging in dialogue with Phoebe, what appears to be ghostly girls who are there and then not. I estimate that there's 2, based on the camera angles. Then again, they're ghosts and they can teleport about. But what it might be a reference to is the fact that Phoebe has 2 Bannettes on her team, and Bannettes are, according to their Pokedex entries, abandoned dolls who will haunt and kind of curse the children that threw them away. And because there's 2, I estimate that there's 2 ghosts in the room, not 1. And actually, speaking of Phoebe, number 5, at the end of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the old lady on the top of Mount Pyre has disappeared. She's just no longer there. And I believe it's confirmed in the game somewhere that this is, in fact, or maybe it's in the manga, it's confirmed that these 2 old people who live at the top of Mount Pyre are Phoebe's grandparents. And at the end of the game, you can find Phoebe on Mount Pyre paying respects to her grandmother. So it's kind of implied that her grandmother, unfortunately, has passed between the times of you battling Phoebe at the Elite Four and you revisiting Mount Pyre in the post-game. Number 6, this is really cool. So this is the first time, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire is the first time that we ever had a remake where you could bring Pokemon up from the original version of the game. So if you had Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, you could use Pal Park to get your Pokemon to Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, or Heart Gold, Soul Silver. You could then use the weird transfer system with Black and White with the mini game, which was so clunky. And then you could use Poke Transfer to get into Pokemon Bank and get your Pokemon onto a copy of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And as it happens, if you do that, if you take a Pokemon from the original Gen 3 games to the new Gen 3 games, you get a secret item for your hidden base, for your secret base. You get a little unwavering friendship certificate, which I have, and I think they're very cool. Number 7, in the Delta episode of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, you talk with Steven Stone, and he mentions a trainer with a black Charizard. He is very clearly referencing Alan, who Steven is seen hanging out with in the Pokemon Mega Evolution specials, which ties in with the main animated show. Does this mean Ash Ketchum lives in the world of the games? Probably not. It just means that there's a version of Alan that lives in the world of the games, and I'd love to battle him sometime. So, Game Freak, if you're ever thinking of adding a trainer into the games, post-game, a champion, a Frontier Brain, Alan with Mega Charizard X would be pretty cool. Okay, so here's one for number 8. 108, Route 108, that is where you find Spiritomb in the new Sea Marvel in Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And why is it here? Well, of course, it's because Spiritomb's Pokedex entry refers to it being the combination of 108 souls kind of combined together. So that's why they placed it in New Sea Marvel on Route 108. Number 9, there is actually a demo for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. I remember getting it the day the demo came out and I was so excited. And with this demo, the main thing that you can get from it is you can get, if you complete it, if you're in the UK, if you're in Europe, if you're in the Western world, you can get a Mega Glalie. If you're in Japan, you can get a Mega Steelix, and you can transfer these Pokemon to your main copy of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. But if you keep playing after you've done the demo, if you keep playing for like sequentially for a number of days, you can actually unlock a hidden event in there where you can get a secret, I think it's a nugget and a big nugget, or maybe it's just a regular nugget, and you can also transfer that over to your game. Just, you know, start the game off with a little bit of extra cash. Number 10, we are only halfway there. The Mirage Islands in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. They're all over the place. You can catch all sorts of unique Pokemon, but they are a reference to the original Mirage Island from Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. An island that would appear based on your trainer ID and secret ID. If I'm right about this, I believe your odds of seeing Mirage Island, and we will put that here, thank you very much to the wonderful person editing this video, your odds of seeing Mirage Island are actually less than seeing a shiny Pokemon. And the only thing you could get on the original Mirage Island was level 50 Wynuts and a very special berry, and that was it. But that intrigue, that mystery, the idea that there are Mirage Islands that appear on the Hoenn region's kind of sea line, I think is really cool, and they adopted that into the idea of course, the Mirage Island mechanic that appears in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Speaking of which, number 11, they sort of make, in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, they sort of make the Southern Island a Mirage Island. And the Southern Island is a fundamental part of the story in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, where you capture Latios or Latias as just part of the story, which was definitely a unique twist. It was a unique way of doing it. I don't know, but I liked that so much. I do like the soaring mechanic. Anyway, that's besides the point. You can actually revisit the Southern Island if you get the mystery Eon ticket into your game. And the way you get that is through Street Pass on Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And the way that started is Game Freak held an event where winners would be given a hotel stay, and they would go to, I think, Stratford in London to go to a game store, collect the Eon ticket via Street Pass, and then they would be sent out to other game stores across the world, or across the country rather, to then keep on transmitting that Eon ticket out. And the reason I know that is because I applied for the competition and didn't win. But I did plan my week around it. I was like, I need to make sure I've got my weekend free in case I need to go to the hotel and transfer the Eon ticket about. All of this pales in comparison, though, to the fact that the original Eon ticket from Ruby and Sapphire was a physical ticket that could be won, I think, or it was part of an edition of a magazine. They're really hard to get hold of now, and they're quite expensive. Again, Joe Merrick from Sowerby has one, and I went over to his place, and you plug in the e-reader attachment to the Game Boy Advance, swipe the Eon ticket, and you are able to revisit the Southern Island and get Latios or Latias and the Soldu, which is an incredibly powerful item for them. Speaking of hidden mystery special event items and things like that, in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, in the Delta episode at the end of the game, big spoiler here, you get to battle Deoxys, and it appears at first on a comet that is the shape of a triangle. And this is a reference to Pokemon Leaf Green, Fire Red, and possibly Emerald as well, I'm not sure, where you got a special event ticket and you could go to an item, I believe it was Birth Island or Naval Rock. No, I think it was Birth Island. You go to Birth Island and there is this triangle and you have to kind of follow it around the island in a specific pattern, and then you can engage in battle with Deoxys. So for 13, I didn't even write anything in my script or on my notes other than Battle Frontier nonsense. And of course, what I'm referring to is how in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, there is a kind of battle island at the end where you can, get your battle points and have a harder challenge. But I think a lot of people were hoping for the Battle Frontier from Pokemon Emerald. And why is that not there? And why is there a statue on that island that shows the Battle Tower and says, sorry, the Battle Tower is currently being built? I think that's just incredibly rude. And the reason they didn't put the Battle Frontier into Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire is because, and I believe this is the quote, they just said they didn't think enough people would play it. And they thought it would be too hard for regular players. And I just think yes, it would be hard. That's the point. That's the point of the Battle Frontier, the challenge beyond the champion. But anyway, I personally think it should have absolutely been in there. And I can see why I wrote Battle Frontier nonsense. Number 14, Looker shows up in Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and while this might not be a reference, Looker is a member of the International Police, and he ends up washed ashore after a shipwreck. And the prevailing theory at the time was because Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire was supposed to be happening at the same time as Leaf Green and Fire Red, and in Leaf Green and Fire Red there is a person on the SS Anne who is a member of the Global Police or International Police undercover, that this person was Looker, and that the SS Anne sank and ultimately led to Looker washing up on shore here. I don't know if the theory still holds up or if it even is a direct reference, but I just found it very interesting. Number 15, Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, and they fixed it for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, but these are those games where you can encounter a shiny Pokemon before having the ability to capture it. In the opening cutscene, if it's Ruby and Sapphire, you can encounter a shiny Poochyena, you can encounter a shiny Zigzagoon in Emerald, and your rival Wally can encounter a shiny Ralts. And guess what? If he catches a shiny Ralts, it won't even be shiny when it evolves in the next battle. When you battle him with Kirlia, it's not even shiny. It's very frustrating. To those of you it's happened to, I am so sorry. Number 16, less of an Easter egg, less of even anything. It's just kind of a weird thing within the games. Regigigas, right? The Absolute is the king of the Reggies. And Hoenn is the region that originally, invented the Reggies. So you'd think they'd include Regigigas in the Hoenn region in a really interesting way. And it was interesting, alright. You catch Regirock, Regice, and Registeel much the same way that you would in the original Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, but then in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, you need to go back to Regice's cave once you've caught all three of them, have Regice in your party, nickname that Regice, I nickname mine Elsa, and then make it hold a Castelia cone, or a Never Melt Ice, or something like that. I think there's one other item, but Never Melt Ice, and have it be in the daytime, which is all really weird requirements, and then you can battle Regigigas. Wild stuff. Number 17, because I realize this video is getting really long and I just kind of want to get through it now. Gastrodon was originally meant to be in Ruby and Sapphire. It was originally a Generation 3 Pokemon, so was Shellos. There are back sprites for it. I think there's audio for it as well. If there is, I'll play now. If not, you just heard nothing, and this was a really awkward pointing and pose thing. But yeah, I think I would have actually quite liked Gastrodon on my Generation 3 team. I guess they didn't want it to maybe conflict with Swampert, maybe, but Groundwater. Then again, Sinnoh has Quagsire, so who knows. Oh, number 18, Junichi Masuda's daughter is programmed into the game. She's in Sutopolis and she gives you berries. This character, that is Masuda's daughter. I mean, it's a representation of his daughter in the game. It's not actually his daughter. Then again, they do have Game Freak employees who you can meet in the offices of Game Freak within the world of Pokemon. So if that's the real world where they make Pokemon games, then... Number 19, the game corner closed in New Marvel City because when they redid Marvel City and for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the standards on having a representation of gambling in games had changed, and so they were no longer able to have the game corner in the same way that it was in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire because this is gambling and they didn't want it, so there you go. And number 20, this is something that you just might not know at all. Okay, so back in the days of Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Leaf Green, and Fire Red, if you wanted to complete your Pokedex, and people complaining about DLC now, you wanted to complete your Pokedex, you needed access to all of these games, plus Colosseum, plus Gale of Darkness, plus Pokemon Channel. It was the way to complete, and certainly playing Pokemon Colosseum was the easiest way of getting the Johto starters, but if you completed your entire Pokedex in Pokemon Emerald, if you got the whole thing done, Professor Birch would give you a Cyndaquil, Totodile, or Chikorita. You could only get one of them. So if you have one of the Johto starters and it's come from Professor Birch, then you have one of the rarest Pokemon that there is. It's just one of the hardest to get Pokemon that there is.